Hey everyone, welcome to Accord's first annual XKO. We brought together an amazing group of leaders who are passionate about building cultures of excellence. Why? Because in 2025, every great leader seems to be focused on two things. First, hiring the right people. And second, once they're in seat, a maniacal focus on delivering results, aka execution. Over the next few hours, I'll be joined by execs from Exactly, Chili Piper, Zoom Info, and many more. We'll dive into a range of topics from how to partner with the elusive CFO, where AI and the craft of sales intersect, what it takes to drive success in an extremely competitive market, why building a culture of excellence and execution is more important than ever, and much more. Some housekeeping items. Yes, this will be recorded if you don't want to take notes. Questions for the speakers, just drop them in the chat. And if you're able to hang around until the end, you'll be the first to hear some exciting news you won't want to miss. So without delay, let's kick things off with our CRO panel. So we all know the best revenue teams don't just hit quotas, they consistently outperform the competition by building a culture of excellence. That's why I'm especially excited with this panel of killer leaders we have at different stages, from high growth startups to scaling mid-market companies to publicly traded enterprises. Each of these leaders have kind of their own perspective on driving and building that culture of excellence and a unique perspective on how to scale out high-performing go-to-market teams. First, we have James, CEO or CRO of Zoom Info, scaling over $1 billion of revenue while transforming their offering recently, building AI native tools like Copilot and other impactful solutions. We have Kyle Norton, CRO of owner.com, Toronto native as well, who's built from the ground up pretty much every aspect of the go-to-market team at Owner, from sales, partnerships, onboarding, demand generation, revenue ops enablement. And we, last but not least, have Matt, CRO and now acting president at Xeon, who's continued to break revenue records and solve some of the most challenging technical problems around fraud and financial crime while scaling the company. So all you, I'm sure you have a million other things you could be doing today. So thanks so much for taking the time to share some of your learnings and perspectives with the community today.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, first, I'm going to pass the mic over to James, because everyone knows that, AI is the top of mind for everyone and how it's transforming the way that pipeline gets generated and deals get done today. How do you see the balance between AI and this craft of sales, especially at market and that intersection? Curious to get your take on kind of these colliding worlds that we have here.
Yeah, well, Ross, thanks for having me. I think it's one of the most popular questions asked in go-to-market. When is there going to be an army of AI agents doing everybody's job? I think, the way I would best articulate where we're seeing AI be successful, it's really around the ability to amalgamate huge amounts of data that would have taken reps a very long time to do. And I think, being a revenue leader over many years, there was always this concept of you have your best 5 or 10 reps, or your best 1 rep. And it's like, what does Ross do that's so different? And the conversation was always, how do we replicate Ross? How do we replicate Ross? And that was always an impossibility, because typically Ross would be doing all kinds of homework at night, would be, doing that additional research, reading 10Ks, reading 10Qs, reading press releases, and just having this level of understanding that, frankly, 80% of your sales team wasn't going to do. They're not wired that way. And as many people as you try to hire, it's just not going to happen. And I think where we really see AI changing the game in sales is what used to take a go-getter like young Ross going the extra mile, spending his nights and weekends doing that additional work. Now that can be summarized and served up in an instant. And I think that is the biggest unlock, where if you think about going into an enterprise account and having the entire buying committee and knowing what they said on their last earnings call, and knowing, who's new in the executive committee, who just got hired from a previous champion, that amount of data would have taken 10, 15, 20 different screens, going into Google, going into LinkedIn, going into SEC filings. 9 times out of 10, that work doesn't get done. Now it can be summarized in an instant. You can tune that to what's most important to your ICP, to what's most prevalent to your product, and you can have that information served up with like a morning cup of coffee. So I think that is a very real use case where we're seeing a lot of success. I think, where some of it's just noise, and we've been working on an AI SDR that is where I think that art, science, and like the real salesmanship, for anybody that's tried an AI SDR, fun fact, it starts out, it has to say, it's from an actual compliance standpoint, you have to say it's an AI SDR and press 2 if you want to opt out. Our point of view is you're going to get 99.5% just opting out immediately, and then you no longer can contact them. And so I think some of those visionary promises are probably a bit further out. And so I still think you need a salesperson that can be delivering the value proposition tuned specifically to all of that information that now can be summarized. But I think from a discovery standpoint and just really hearing what the customer wants and building that relationship, I think as we've seen in a digital e-commerce world for now, well over a decade, you still have customers that want to have a relationship with the person. They want to be able to reach out. They want a level of support. And that's a sliding scale in terms of how much support, but I think it's been made very clear that they still want it. And so, I think just to finish the thought, I think there are several AI use cases that are tremendous to making more sellers better at their job. But I don't think we've necessarily hit that point where AI can do the job of selling to a prospect, building a relationship, building that trust, being a partner. AI is not there yet.
So basically what you're saying is it's a tool for people to get better and maybe have the best be able to do more work, but it's not going to replace kind of the core premise of especially that kind of upmarket sales motion.
That's my take, at least.
Yeah. Well, curious, I could share my thoughts, but I'm more interested in hearing Kyle's and Matt's on this. So maybe Kyle, to start, how does that kind of map to your way of thinking about using AI across your team and your experience with that?
Quite resonant. Yeah. My framing is slightly different, especially being in a high velocity SMB environment. But largely, I think AI and the way that we're trying to apply it today and how I see it over the next few years is really about helping sellers do more selling and obfuscating a bunch of the other work that is non-revenue generating, filling in Salesforce fields, doing data entry, pre-call prep, like James is talking about. I think a lot of those activities add marginal value, and we're really focused on using AI to try to pull as much out of the reps day to day as possible. The handoff between sales and onboarding into CS is another really important area of opportunity. So we're really applying AI internally. I agree with James. I think the promise of AI SDR is overstated for sure for calling. I think that might be regulated in a way that it might never really work.
Yeah, no thanks on that one.
Yeah. And even for email, I mean, I think there's some experts that do a great job with it, but 98% of the time, AI outbound is pretty generic. It produces an exciting sugar rush pop at the beginning because you're just skimming the high intent from carpet bombing your entire market. But largely it hasn't been proven to be done in a very sustainable way outside of some very sharp practitioners who are really savvy growth marketers. So I think James and I have a pretty similar view.
Totally. And to round us out, Matt, any things you agree or disagree with there and your experience using some of these tools?
Yeah, broadly agree with James. I think it's optimizing for productivity, like some of the hard work, the homework, like, territory discovery, like quarterly business planning, account mapping. The promise of AI hopefully is to make sellers better at, selling and have them spend more time in front of customers and less time doing research in the background. As far as replacing the seller, I think we're probably a long way away from that. I think there's an element of accountability that's associated with coming to an agreement with somebody who has, a personality and a team and a company behind them. And, AI may represent, what your product can do and what it can't do, and help you find accounts that you don't know about. But for the most part, you want to optimize for getting your sellers in front of customers and having the most valuable conversation and being the most prepared for it.
Totally. Well, to wrap that up, I see a future that actually has maybe the best sellers making much more money and making more headcount for sales at companies because they're able to be more productive. Less so replacing everyone, but it seems like we're we're in agreement there. But
the worst sellers are at risk of replacement.
Yes, because the best are going to get that. Yeah,
if you're a generic inbound SDR that's not doing a ton of qualification or discovery, not adding a lot of value, AI is going to come to your job, because that is going to be a video or a chat interface. I think that is certainly at risk, but the best selling and the ultimate expression of the craft, I think, has a place for a while.
Yeah, Kyle, I think to that point, one of the interesting things that's come up, and again, having run teams for a while, you always have this skill versus will, and I'm sure we've all had folks in the sales ranks that they're not that good, but they work their asses off. But then when they get on calls, you just hate everything they say, and it's just not great, but you keep them around because they're willing to make 1,000 calls or go hit 1,000 doors or whatever the go-to-market setup is. I do think there's going to be a fundamental shift where you can bring in higher skilled talent on the front end while being able to basically reduce the amount of manual effort that gave sales a bad name. And so we're seeing, from a talent perspective, folks from industries that frankly probably wouldn't have gotten into sales 10 years ago, because if you're going to start as an SDR, you have to make the 100 calls a day, the 1,000 calls a week, get kicked in the teeth a ton just doing cold outreach. And so I think there's probably going to be this paradigm shift where, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever side of the coin you're on, that grinder, if you will, that doesn't, they lack the eloquence, they lack the sophistication, they can't do discovery, but you keep them in the org because they work so hard. I think those folks are going to have a tough time. But I think the benefit there is that you will be able to bring on talent from, whether it's from universities or from other industries that would have walked away from sales in the past, that now with some of the AI, supplementing just the manual grind effort, that you can get a brighter, more eloquent, better salesperson. And so I do think there will be a paradigm shift there.
Totally. And shifting gears a little bit from some of the tooling side and technology to the personal side, and again, going back to this, culture of excellence, passing the mic over to you, Kyle. How do you think about, especially building, pretty much all of Owners go-to-market team from scratch over the last few years? How do you think about kind of setting the bar and the standard for the team, and holding the team accountable to that in a positive way?
So there's a lot in this question.
Solve sales leadership for us today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it starts with hiring. If you're hiring highly motivated, driven people with a history of excellence, curiosity, coachability, and a bunch of those key DNA traits that you look for, then a lot of what happens downstream of that gets a lot easier. The thing I try to impress upon my managers is every hire that does not exceed the bar of the current team makes us worse. And it seems harsh, but it is very much true. And so you just need to go try to find A++ talent as much as you can. And obviously that's easier for me to say. We've got an exciting brand and we're growing, so we can attract that type of person. And if you're not, you have to get creative about finding diamonds in the rough that maybe don't have the resume, but do have the DNA, and equipping and enabling them. So I would definitely, if you're talking about excellence and execution, it starts with a desire to do it, because it's hard, it's unsexy, and you just need a person with a certain wiring. And then it's about systems and enablement. And so the systems that you put in place need to reinforce the behaviors you want and reduce friction for everything that is positive and introduce friction for everything that's negative. If you want a highly enriched CRM, if you want people to take great notes, how do you make it easy for people to take great notes? If you want to limit the bad handoffs to your onboarding team, how do you introduce friction to make that more challenging? And this is just behavioral economics 101. It's nudge theory, but you have to imbue that into your system design, and that's your tech stack, your business process design, and then your rituals and routines, and just getting really intentional with the way your business operates. We call them our operating rhythms. It's one of my sort of 7 revenue leadership pillars. Your operating rhythms have to be designed and deployed in a way that can slowly nudge people forward towards a common goal. And a lot of that is standardization. As much as people don't like it, standardizing how your team runs a one-on-one, how they run their team weekly meeting, how you get reporting from them every week. So, every leader rolls up a weekly summary to me in a standard format, and just, having the diligence and the discipline to instrument the little things is ultimately, I think, how you get to great execution.
Totally. I'd love to get especially Matt's take on this, kind of being at a similar stage, or kind of right after the stage that you're building towards, Kyle. But how do you think about prioritizing all of those different things while you have, that next month, that next quarter, that next year, growth goals to hit, people to hire? How do you think about the right amount of standardization and process and rigor at the earlier stages of the company versus, later?
Yeah, I'd say it's tough in the beginning. You don't have all the resources you need. Maybe you can't attract the kind of talent that you need for certain key roles. But I think if you start, to Kyle's point, in the hiring process, and you're hiring for like IQ and values, you're going to drop people into a situation where at our stage in a company, like, they can figure things out quickly. And so that clock speed is super important when everything isn't perfect or like finally settled yet. And then I think that first 90 days is super important for a sales rep. And, you may be doing a million things, and that person may not even have a deal yet, but you have to create reasons to have lots of interactions for that person across the company, because that first 90 days is going to set the tempo for like what they believe their expectations are from them for the next 1 to 5 years. So I think you really got to flood the zone, make sure that they've got touch points with solution engineering and onboarding and the executive team to really make sure that the expectations are set immediately. Even, you want to be like, oh, that person doesn't have a deal yet, so why am I going to get on a call with them? But that first 90 days, I think, is super important, because there may be process changes that happen in that first 90 days at like our stage of a company, right? Oh, we re-implemented something in the CRM on like day 45 for an employee. So like getting people who have the clock speed to be able to kind of maneuver quickly and be agile, but then just, building those interpersonal relationships with your sellers early in their tenure, I think, is super important.
Totally. Yeah. It kind of comes back to, with sales, with building teams, expectation setting, and it's very hard to reset. Right. So making sure you get it from the start is a challenge. James, how do you think about this? At your global scale, across $1 billion of revenue, how do you think about the right amount of standardization when you have different geos, product lines, segments, all of those different things working at once?
Yeah, I think, just to echo both Kyle and Matt, irrespective of size or scale, I think hiring is where it all starts. And there's a handful of things that, if I think about just the amount of frontline managers that might be promoted being a manager for the first time, they don't know how to hire. And so making sure there's a standardized process of what to look for, what to sort of lose quickly on in terms of, 9 short tenures in 2 years, probably going to be the 10th. Things like, again, athletes, musicians, anything where people had to, perform at a high level. They're accustomed to getting feedback. They're accustomed to like losing, to be frank. If you're an athlete, or you've lost a game, or you've had to perform in any kind of, sort of competitive example, like that concept of game tape, whatever it is that you're doing, there's all these nuggets that you can find within certain individuals. So I think hiring is a huge one, and making a standard process to allow at least 90% that you're not going to let someone through that shouldn't or doesn't fit your cultural values. I think having the cultural values is a really important thing, and then embodying them. It starts to get into a little bit of the mumbo jumbo around, hey, let's sit around and create a bunch of values that we write books about. But I do think if embodied and if repeated and lived, it's a really impactful thing. On the expectations, to Matt's point, 100% agree. I think one of the things that becomes, on teams or in certain regions, if expectations aren't clear of like, what does good look like? What am I going to either be promoted for or put on a pit for? The worst thing in an organization of any size is a level of opacity around like, am I doing well? Am I not? And, we make it really, really clear, whether it's, inbound to outbound or outbound to SMB or AE to AM, any of those key milestones or key promotional jumps. Like, I think one of the things that we did here recently is we had lost that kind of trajectory, if you will, of like, what is next? And if you're in sales at any point in time, it doesn't necessarily have to be jumping into leadership or jumping to the enterprise, but you should know what is next, because what you are doing at that point is very challenging. And so making sure that that next step, whether it's compensation, whether it's a better territory, whether it's, less accounts, more accounts, however the GTM is set up, there should be kind of like a top and a bottom. And, again, back to the athlete or the performer, like, it's the concept of like, you're going to carry the water for a little while, but then you're going to work your way up, and then somebody's going to carry the water for you, whether that's an SDR pairing, whether that's the best territory. There has to be a very logical next step. And even in an org of, GTM for us is 2,000 people, in each segment, in each vertical, in each of those, there is a milestone. And I think keeping people reaching for that brass ring in combination with expectations being crystal clear of what it is you need to do in each of those, it does keep people knowing not only where they stand, but also what is next, to get to that next level of a better life or a better compensation, whatever it may be. Again, so I fully agree with both Kyle and Matt. And then I think on the last one, just in terms of, overarching culture, if you will, we have done as we've grown over the years, we've tried to keep a blueprint of what not to do. When companies get big, bureaucracy gets high, you find yourself with 15 one-on-ones a day, every day, and you kind of get separated from the action, if you will. And so we're still founder led. And so, making sure that we almost have like the anti-blueprint of like, this is what big companies do that makes them slow and bad, et cetera, et cetera. And, not to say we haven't stepped in some of the traps, but trying to avoid them as much as possible, keeping that nimbleness, keeping that, everybody's communicating in a regular way. We eliminate the bureaucrats, if you will. I think that's really important as you start to get bigger. And, as revenue leaders, this is my last piece, I'll shut up, I promise. But, managers, directors, VPs, SVPs, whatever. I think we all know that person that thinks they get to that level and now I'm done. I can sit back, I can do corporate stuff, and I'm going to help with strategy, and I'm going to help with the values. And like, you lose a little bit of the dirt under the fingernails. I think it's so important, irrespective of size, to make sure that every leader, all the way up to myself, our CEO, we are in there doing it as much as anybody else is doing it. I've got a calendar audit. I make sure 50% of my week, every week, is customer facing or prospect facing. Because the further you get away from that and the more you get into the let's do a round table to create some mumbo jumbo and do corporate stuff, not only does the team start to lose faith, but then you start to get further away from the pulse of what customers are saying. And again, I think a lot of big companies go that route. And I think leaning back into some of those core principles is a really important thing.
And one of the things to double click into, around expectation setting and the career mapping, the straw that stirs the drink is the frontline manager. In any company, it's my opinion that the most important role is the frontline manager. You could give a great team to a bad manager, that team will be bad. You can give a mediocre team to a great manager, and that team was probably going to be pretty good. And where I think things break so often is a lack of leadership enablement. That's not a new point. We have lots of rep enablement, but then nobody teaches the managers how to do their job. Yeah. It's something that I'm spending a lot of my time on, codifying every part of the leadership toolkit to teach people how to do great coaching and how to interview and look for the right things, how to operate their business, how to get into deals and move with their own sales craft. What James is talking about, being on the front lines. That is the place where things degrade quickly, because a team goes from, I was managing reps when I started here. We were $2.5 million, so things don't get watered down at all. But as you introduce 3, 4, 6 lines of leadership, in James's case, it can be really difficult to make sure the commander's intent is all the way down to that frontline team, and you need amazing frontline management enablement to make that work. I think that's where the execution degrades the fastest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That frontline manager position, like depending on how fast the company's moving, eventually they will get the team they deserve, right? And so if they're not going to be able to do that, then it's going to be a reflection of their skills and their tenacity and how enabled they are to coach people.
Totally. Well, shifting gears a bit before we wrap, because I really want to dig into maybe a less sexy part than the AI and the future of sales and how to drive execution excellence is the process stuff, the cadence, the operational rigor, stuff kind of outside of the craft of sales. But I think even at early stage companies, let alone at later stage companies, doesn't get as much of a voice. So Matt, I know that you've focused your career a lot, and especially at Xeon early days on how do you build that operating cadence and these core processes across the team. How do you think about that? And how do you think about prioritizing that again when there's the big next hire, when there's that deal, the next quarter, the next year goes up? How do you think about working on kind of those core kind of like infrastructure and process pieces at the company?
Yeah, I think consistency, if you've got like two levels of sales leadership and you're getting asked different questions about a deal by both of those, you're sort of like, what should I care about most, right? And so I think you start with like the basics. We go in and we ask everybody in my leadership team asks reps on the deal the same questions, which is like, why are they making a change? Why should it be Xeon and why now? Right. And then you can start building out from there around like things like qualification and pipeline management. But that consistent voice from the leadership team, from like the CEO on down about like what's important when we're talking to our customers, I think that's your base, and you can start building on that.
Like a shared language, right? Is the other way I've heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to unify. We've got a very global team for the size company we are. We're 300 employees, but we're in Singapore, Budapest, London, Austin. And so, it's tough to get people together and get them on the same page. But that shared language about how we talk about customers and business problems is super important.
I take offense to you saying that process is not sexy, Ross.
I don't know. I feel like it's always like, the last thing. It's like, we talk about the deal. We talk about, how do we wrap up this quarter, this month really strong? And, oh, this open role. One's like, hey, let's all sit down and have the most senior. It goes to the analyst, right? And then it goes to the person that has no person. At least this is what we've seen, at Accord when people are working on this. It's like, it becomes a top level initiative. And then who owns it is never a leader. It's always, some random person off in this team, and then we're talking to them and they have no perspective on what it's actually like in the field, what it's actually like to manage a team. And then they get this random process and they're like, this doesn't map to any of the best practice, any of the things that work. And then it kind of slowly dies. And that's why I say the unsexy stuff. It never feels like it gets the resources and the spotlight like some other piece of the business. So I know you're kind of an exception to that rule, Kyle.
I try to be. You got to build these things from the jump, because like I was looking up Xeon before, you guys doubled headcount in 6 months or something crazy like that. You can't go at that pace, and obviously ZoomInfo's had a crazy run. You can't grow that quickly without it all imploding, without these foundation pieces in place. And you just have to, if it's not you, if you're not the systems thinker, you need to go spend extra dollars on your RevOps partner and make sure that there's somebody around the table that can do it with you, because it's especially in today's world where systems and tooling are going to be such a compelling advantage. AI, which we're going to get to, somebody in the leadership team needs to be an expert in thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, and at our stage as a company, we centralized all operations functions into go-to-market ops. So it's, marketing and sales and success, and like have a single customer engagement methodology all the way through from like awareness to referral status. And putting strategy into that ops function was a really strong play for us. Making them responsible for strategy enablement and the operational infrastructure, that gives you that kind of center of excellence that you really need to make sure that like people know there's one person to ask the question from. Like there's one place to go to know where this stuff lives, and then they're responsible for that repository of things. So it doesn't just go from like a PowerPoint to like a sales 411 and a set of expectations. There's like all these steps, intermediate steps that are required as far as like the infrastructure and the tooling. And to Kyle's point earlier, you got to make process easy, right? It can't just be a bunch of fields that have to get filled out in the CRM to like get to the next stage. Like it definitely has to be easy for people to do if you want to do it the right way, or they're just going to do the bare minimum, right?
Totally.
We have a central team for that as well.
I think to double down on Kyle's point too, it's like an always on sexy, because, especially at a certain scale, if the process is wrong, it can blow up very quickly. And I think, in our case, this was just last year. We had a new business machine that was like the crown jewel. A lot of people gave it a lot of credit, but the machine itself, it was one of the first things when I took the role. The machine itself was set to just this high velocity SMB business. And then we'd be like, hey, what's wrong with the segment mix? And obviously SMB, it can be a very challenging place if not done right. And the whole process was set up incorrectly, where we were, new business and account management were completely bifurcated. New business was just a land. They got no upside if there was any growth on a particular deal. And so if I'm a rep in new business and it's going to take me 6 months just to get through procurement at Cisco, and I get a small land and then some account manager gets rich off of it, meanwhile, I can go close 10, 15K SMBs that probably aren't going to renew or might not pay. There was this gravitational pull that was all set up by the process and systems in general. Comp, router, all of those things were set, purpose-built for SMB. And so fixing that process, segmenting the business, like doing that unsexy work, has allowed us to change and fundamentally shift our segment mix. And so I think it's hugely important. And I think if it's not your superpower as a revenue leader, absolutely go spend money to hire people whose it is. But I do think from the traditional sales leader, that's the locker room, hey, I'm going to get on a deal with you, all that kind of stuff, there has to be a big emphasis put on how the machine is actually set up, or else, again, regardless of size or what stage you're at, it might be working, macro might be in your favor, but the music stops very quickly if those processes are wrong. And then I think to the just overall sales processes, I think, again, methodology, super important. I think that is an area that we say AI having a big impact, where if you think about all the things that traditional poobah CROs would come in with, it's account plans, it's medic, it's force management, it's sales, they come in, they spend a ton of money on those things. And it's like every rep hates it, because all it means, it sounds great on
it's just more inspection, right? It's just like fill out more fields.
Busy work. It's like, oh, I got to have this account plan. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pencil whip it just so it shows a checkbox in CRM. Or if it's, in a sales methodology, now there's just more shit I have to fill out. And so I think AI, what's really helpful is with conversational intelligence tools, with all of the AI functions, you can basically automate a sales methodology. You can automate account plans. I think that is one of the biggest unlocks. Again, just democratizing what the best reps did to that lower tier reps. All that stuff is a lot easier, but it is still unbelievably necessary.
Totally. And I think it's kind of funny with this group of leaders. And again, not, just having VPs of sales, but CROs and, Matt with president, like having that whole customer journey and the marketing part, I think is so important. I saw this, at companies I was at before, and when we work with folks at Accord, there's such a gap between the top of funnel, the sales execution, and then what happens to customers after. And I feel like there's this really big shift back to that whole customer journey and life cycle. That's got us really excited. I feel like that's just, hey, people are looking at their bills these days. Oh shit, maybe we should care about what happens after we sign a deal that doesn't just renew and grow, and headcount grows over the last 5 or 10 years. So I think we're seeing a really big shift back to, the importance of process, because it's harder to do across teams than just for your sellers or just the CSM. So that's been really cool to see. Well, maybe to wrap, maybe we'll do the converse. We've talked a lot about best practices, maybe some of the mistakes that you've made that you can maybe help some other people avoid when it comes to, building a culture of excellence and some of the go-to-market, people and process stuff that we've talked about. I'll try to start with one, not just asking you to put yourselves out there. One that comes top of mind is this kind of a classic thing, like the right people for the right role, and thinking about the different segments. I've seen some people be incredibly successful in the SMB world and think the future is, an enterprise. and hasn't been successful there, or an amazing seller that for some reason the company makes it seem like you need to be a manager or leader to be a top performer at the company, and forcing them into those roles, and thinking about, how can someone be excellent at their craft as an SDR for a long time, as a seller, as even a frontline manager. So that's kind of one mistake that I've definitely made that stands out to me. But if there's any kind of learnings like that you can share with your past selves out there listening, would love to hear them. Maybe we'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think, when your best sellers are asking you questions, right, it's because things aren't clear enough, So I think like really having a pulse on whether it's pricing or packaging or competitive, that you do get into those places where maybe the playbook kind of like runs out of gas, right? And I think you need to really identify what those things are by having conversations with your best sellers, right? They know where they're going to run into objections. They know when they're going to get stuck. And so you do want to kind of start small with process and kind of build off on it, but you have to iterate and very quickly. And that feedback from your best sellers, like if they're asking you a question or they're coming to me or Nick or somebody on my leadership team, it's because we haven't made it clear enough what the right thing to do is, right? And we haven't developed a point of view on what the expectations are yet. And I think I've been slow a few times to kind of make that change, you try and do the thing that takes a quarter in a month and the thing that takes a month in a week when you're moving really fast, but you just really need that feedback loop, especially when you're rethinking kind of, like James said, kind of the machine, like how does that operate? How have we planned territories? How have we what does our inbound lead routing look like? Sometimes things break and you got to move like very quickly. And most of the time your best sellers are going to be the ones that call it out because they're super high performers and anything that gets in their way is like really going to ruffle their feathers.
And there's a Goldilocks point there between not enough information and way too much information. We're struggling with this now, is we feel like we've documented a lot, but then people don't know what's in the documentation, like our rules of engagement, for example. It's like, okay, so we've over documented. Now we need to simplify and communicate. It's a tough balance to strike.
Like we didn't read Appendix E on the 17th page of this thing where it was really clear. Okay, yeah.
Competitor information, big, awesome competitor battle cards, but do people really have all of that? I think it's a great call out by Matt.
Awesome. James, to round it out.
I mean, a lot of mistakes over the years, so this could be a while. But no, I think one of the biggest, and it's kind of a twofer, understanding early on that not all sales reps, not all teams are wired the same. You can hire for the right things, and that's great, but early learning lesson. I remember when I took over my first sales team and I told everybody to do what I had done. And there's this we were a very technical sale. And I was like, oh, this is how I did it. You should do it like this. And this guy was, brilliant. Guy could basically build a data center. And I heard him on a call trying to do what I was telling him to do. And it was just not his forte. Like very different approaches where he was far more technical than I was. And so I think that has stayed with me in terms of not all reps have the same strengths. And I think being able to build out a rounded out team and really leaning into what makes them great at their particular craft, whether it's report building and networking, highly technical, great at discovery. Everybody has these superpowers. And I think on the flip side of that coin is also knowing that not everybody is wired the same in terms of what motivates them. That was another big learning where you have comp, you have title, you have work-life balance, you have promotion, all of these different things. One of the big mistakes early is I thought everybody was motivated like I was. And I think I've got folks on my team that basically allocate their entire equity grants or their entire, merit bonus to their teams because the money is like, whether they have a trust fund or whether they just don't care about money. Like, I think assuming what somebody cares about is a huge mistake. And so knowing not only like what their skill sets are and what makes them great or what can make them great at what they do, and then, leaning into that from an enablement and a training standpoint. And it's not just do as I do, to Kyle's point on the frontline manager. It's the biggest mistake I see in every frontline manager is this is how I was successful. This is how you need to be successful. Big mistake. And then again, just taking the time to understand what makes your team, your directs, their directs tick, and creating that pathway of like, hey, you hit the expectations. these are the things. It's not always getting promoted to like enterprise. It could be, I want to take my kids to school every day and I want to be able to work remote. Understanding what those key things are, I think, drives that culture of excellence to drive everybody to do their best work versus, hey, $500 spiff, everybody should care about that. You know, I think that's a mistake we see quite often.
Yeah, no, those are great calls. And go for it.
A last one to round it out, because I don't want to just agree with Matt's. And there's an important one here that I think is a message for all those sales leaders. Was not the biggest mistake I made in the early innings of my career, especially as I transitioned to tech, was not paying enough attention to post-sale. And it wasn't until I had to spin up that team for the first time, and I was sitting there with my own issues now in my palms in terms of misset expectations and poor handoff. I think that's something that we continue to get wrong. I tried to pivot hard towards being the most holistically minded revenue leader I could, but I see this all the time. I talk to all the founders I work with. One of the first problems that we diagnose for a larger company, say they're like 10 million ARR and beyond, is deal quality, expectations, and handoff. Is that done really well? Because the cost of sales has continued to rise. It is such a competitive market. AI makes it easier than ever to spin up a new product, a new company. And we need to be more mindful than ever of the post-sales experience. Investing dollars and headcount into those teams as leaders, and then as managers, getting your team oriented around deal quality, customer experience. That is still something I see is missing all the time. And again, it comes down to the frontline manager. Are your frontline managers bought into that? Are they reinforcing that message? Does your comp plan reinforce it? What is the friction and fuel you're using to guide people down the right path? I think that is a lesson that I wish I had learned much earlier than I did.
Yeah, I would say +1 to that. I think so many folks start in new business, and so it's all just about getting signatures, and then it's somebody else's problem. And then typically as you rise through the ranks, you take on account management, you take on CX, and you're like, oh my God, what did I do over the last year? So yeah, great point.
Awesome. Well, we'll let you guys get back to it again. You have a million things going on, and this was awesome. I have a lot of good takeaways for myself as a leader and for our team, and hopefully folks there listening in right now do as well. But yeah, Matt, Kyle, James, thanks so much for taking time out of the busy schedules to share some of these learnings with the community.
Yeah, thanks, Ross.
Hey everyone, very excited for this next session. One of the most important but maybe mysterious relationships out there behind closed doors with finance. We're going to be talking about how both internally and externally revenue leadership and leaders in general can partner with the office of the CFO and finance. Both from a planning perspective, just coming out of annual planning and kickoffs for a lot of folks with a big year ahead. How can we partner effectively with our finance stakeholders and making sure we have a successful year? So we have two amazing experienced CFOs here today. We have Danielle, CFO at League, where she spent the last 8 years helping navigate growth, scale operations, and transform how health organizations deliver a world-class digital experience to their members. And we also have Tyler here from Freshworks, who brings a wealth of knowledge in scaling SaaS companies. Before joining Freshworks, you might have heard of Zuora, where he took them from early startup days to a very successful IPO. So a lot to learn from these folks, and I'm personally excited to dig in. So thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today.
Thanks so much. So good to be here.
Awesome. Well, the first question we're going to jump in, we'll give you an easy one, and we'll make it more tough from there. Danielle, I'll pass this one off to you to start. How can CROs and revenue leaders better partner with CFOs from an internal perspective? I think a lot of people, maybe you get that promotion to VP, CRO, you haven't necessarily partnered with an executive on the finance team. And a lot of people are wondering, how can I be a good partner while making sure, goals are realistic and all that kind of stuff? So curious to get your take on what advice you'd give to folks to partner with someone like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I would flip the question a little bit too, to think about how growth is the most important thing at the business. If the finance team is not spending a ton of time with your revenue organization, then they should be. I mean, I'll share a bunch of ideas on how revenue leaders can work better with me, but I spend like an inordinate amount of time with our sales team, and I have since the beginning of my time at League, like at the expense of our finance team, to make sure that I know and I have a pulse on what's going on in the business, because growth is like the heartbeat of our business. But to get into like a few different ideas, like forecasts are the most critical part of how we run the business, and sales forecasts are at the top of that. You can't do your revenue forecast or your EBITDA forecast without understanding what's going on in sales. So, I mean, I need a CRO that's going to be honest with me and open with me about how deals are tracking and what the forecast is each quarter and how things are changing. I need Salesforce to be updated. Like, I know it's so simple, but like, please just update the deals in Salesforce. I'm just kind of nothing without the data that you all are giving me. So, I mean, that's definitely key. I would say that, again, how I kind of flipped the question at the beginning, though, is it is the finance's job to get these things right, though. To get these disciplines and these processes right, I think is finance's job. Like, I have implemented many different processes along the way to enable the CRO to give me the right information. I don't rely on the CRO to just come up with this stuff on their own. I have implemented all of these checks and balances along the way, and I just expect honesty and open communication from a CRO.
Awesome. So kind of that bi-directional. It's not just CRO or VP of sales delivering this stuff, as how are we partnering and have context on some of the details and even the nitty gritty. Awesome. Tyler, anything you'd add or kind of change to Danielle's perspective there?
Yeah, no, I think Danielle described it really well. Obviously, predictability is paramount, right? If we don't have predictability in a business, then it's really difficult to run the business. You don't know where you're going to make investment decisions. You can't, really have grasp on your business model until you have some predictability. So it's working together to make sure that we have not just the data, but a visibility into the business itself and kind of what's around the corner, especially if you have kind of different types of sales motions, it can get quite complex. So that's one, the predictability is one part of it. I think in general, if you just step back, it's the most important thing in my mind is the kind of common understanding that we all have the same goal. And when you approach it that way, then it's not like, okay, who's the bad people on the finance side and they're our enemy, as opposed to we're all in this together. So let's try to design an outcome that gets, number one, what the company needs, but number two, what any kind of go-to-market organization needs as well, which is to be able to demonstrate success. And there can be a really healthy balance between those two things. But the conversations have to happen, and there has to be a common understanding of, okay, what are the pain points on one side versus what are the goals on the other. And so that constant communication at the highest levels, but then also looking down at the micro to understand, okay, is it systems, people, process, and where do we need to make investments to make it easier for go-to-market folks to do their jobs? Because it is a really hard job. And so I think that's where the partnership has to kind of start with is this common understanding. And then you can work through hard issues as long as everybody realizes they're on the same team.
Where do we think that trope comes from? Because obviously we're describing the ideal state and this partnership and aligned to the same goals, but there is no doubt that sometimes it does feel like finance needs to be, the bad person and, kind of hey, we need to follow these rules, or, oh no, I have to go into this forecast meeting as a revenue leader, or, oh, we're going to get these numbers. Where do you think that breakdown so often comes from? And any advice for leaders on how to avoid that? Yeah, Danielle, maybe I'll pass it to you.
I think a big part I've seen is some fear around the consequences of missing a forecast, and then the revenue leader not sharing what's actually going on in the business. Yeah, it's just it's fear-based is what my experience has been. But Tyler, like I love what you said about us being on the same team. We really at League tried to tell all of the leaders, like, you're on the leadership team. You're not on the finance team. You're not on the growth team. You have your own teams, but you're also on the leadership team, and we're all in this together. And I found that that's really helped. But yeah, to go back to your question, I building those relationships and knowing that, like, you don't have to be scared of telling me what's going to happen. Like, we're in this together and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That's been really, really important to get the information that I need from the CRO.
Yeah, I think just again being in that role before of owning that number, sometimes it can seem isolating because other people are running the business, finance is doing a great job, operations, marketing, and it's like, well, at the end of the day I carry the back, and this comes down to me to deliver that despite being on this first team leadership team. Yeah, Tyler, how do you see that differentiation? Because it does feel like that, when you own the number, you want to deliver for your team. So I think that's where a lot of the fear and anxiety does come from.
So I think that's a great point, Ross, because I think if a company approaches it that, okay, a CRO or a head of sales or something, it's their number and they feel like they're out at the top of the mountain by themselves, with the spotlight where they're going to get all the glory, but also take all the pain.
Yeah.
That's a pretty unhealthy situation where Danielle just said it is like, we're all on the management team. So it's actually all of our, and, even the way we get compensated at Freshworks, it's not, we're all together. If we miss, the bookings number, we all miss bonus. And so when you start at the very top, that we're all on the same team, it's all of our number and there's no finger pointing. So we're all in it together. Now, you asked Ross, like, why does things break down? Like at the bottom layer, as a rep, you kind of want reps who are going to be at least, they want to close deals, and you got to get it. And they're going to push the envelope any way they can if they're aggressive enough to get those deals closed. And that's okay. So you just have to have the governance structure in place that there can be boundaries that are put, because you can't blame somebody for pushing up against the boundary, but you then have to have the capability to have common understanding at the top, so that when push comes to shove at the end, you make the right decision as a company. It's okay to say no or create those boundaries. If you don't create the boundaries, then things can go awry. And then that's where, number one, you don't necessarily have predictability, but that's where you actually get really bad behaviors. And then you might have some risk to your financial statements. And that's not, you can never get there. So that's why starting at the top with the foundational understanding that, hey, we're all in this together. And then kind of in all this together, that means these are the boundaries that we're going to create around things. This is what we need as a company. Then you have to have the mechanism by a deal by deal basis, how to kind of control that. And so that's where I think things break when you don't have it at the top, and then people get desperate because they might be, at risk of not hitting a number. So they're going to try to do unnatural things. And that's where at the end, if you don't have that common understanding, that's where real conflict happens.
There's something so powerful about the ambition, the manifesting your own destiny. Like, I agree with you, Tyler. I don't want to lose that. I don't want AEs to lose that. I don't want our growth leaders to lose that. So yeah, those checks and balances, I completely agree, are so critical. But I never want to put people down, and I want people to feel like I can do it, even though the data says you probably can't close it this quarter. I want you to think you can, and I want you to go for it. So it is such a balance of like, go manifest that, go make that happen. But also we need to predict what will happen at the bottom line.
And it's also our job to also have some empathy and every once in a while be a little bit creative, as long as we're not, kind of breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Because if you're just completely rigid, black and white, then that makes it really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. My experience has been, kind of up and down in the different layers of the sales org and finance org, is the people at the top kind of share the same philosophy, the people at the bottom. And sometimes it's this middle management layer that actually stifles a lot of that creativity, because their job obviously is to, enforce those processes. And then that's, I think, where some of the friction does come from. There might be a lot of alignment at the very top between the CFO and the CRO. Rep comes up with something creative and we're trying to do these things. And it's like, when you get to the CFO, I used to, elevate some of these asks, and they'd be like, oh, that makes sense. Or how can we figure it out? Whereas, you might waste a month or two and lose a deal, because in the kind of that middle ground, there's not a ton of that flexibility or empathy. So that's been some of my experience on the front lines. Awesome. Well, shifting gears again, we're going to kind of bounce from this internal perspective to external. Maybe to start, because again, there's kind of this trope around, finance people killing deals, or, like, love to understand the perspective of finance getting these asks without a lot of context, and things that might not make sense or kind of mirror what they've been telling their team, in terms of budgeting and cycles and decision making. Like, why does it sometimes feel like, finance doesn't understand from maybe a sales rep's perspective, and they're killing deals? What's the right way to work with them? Maybe we'll start with kind of some of the frustrating things, and we'll get to some of the best practices. But, what's been some of the challenges having the decision-making power and budget holder power on the finance side when working on kind of external deals or with partners? Tyler, I'll start with you.
Well, I think if you're talking about like on a deal by deal basis, we can chat about that in terms of, maybe finance doesn't understand it. I think what ends up if you don't actually have I said boundaries, if you don't have the capability to be involved, and whether you consider it finance or something else, right? We have an order management deals desk group. It does roll up through me, but in the past it's rolled up through go-to-market teams. And in there, being part of the deal, that also gets ahead of structuring a deal, right? You get in trouble when, a rep might be talking to a prospect and, stuff is communicated on a deck or something like that you get down to, okay, we can't price and package that way. Or, this doesn't, make sense from an economic perspective or something, right? And so getting ahead of it through enablement and training and everything else, but also having the systems to be able to kind of be part of that process. So you never actually get into a situation that something happened outside of process. It always does, but you got to be able to have those guardrails, which are then the things that you can create those boundaries in. And, without it, you're going to be at risk, and you're going to have to do a bunch of cleanup. And then usually, and I've been in situations where in the past, you have to pull back completely and kind of overdo it in the governance until you get back to a point where you feel like you have some machinery. And so I kind of put it on both sides, right? I had an example once where it was actually when I first got to Freshworks, and there was a deal, really, they weren't paying their bill. This is a long time ago. It's like 5 years ago. I said, okay, let's just look at the contract in the order form, see what it says. And there was crickets, right? I'm like, we do have a contract and order form, right? And ended up we didn't for that deal, right? But I went to our head of sales at the time, and I was like, hey, how could you possibly have put this through? And he's like, well, you guys let me, right?
And let me, that's not the right approach.
So there is accountability to, whatever you want to call it, the operation side or the back office side, to be able to have that infrastructure in place so the boundaries are understood and the rules are understood. Then you actually then can have a conversations if there's gray areas in between. But if that infrastructure isn't even there, then how is a rep supposed to know, or who's going to be governing them, right? And so I think you have to start with that foundation.
Totally. And maybe Danielle, for you, the flip side of this is maybe being a partner to your internal stakeholders on them purchasing software partnerships or services. I'm curious, how do you think about, either yourself or your team? Obviously there's budget planning and annual stuff, but things come up. It's business, right? Especially in, high growth companies. And when we want to, find an opportunity to either cut costs or drive revenue, what are the things that are sometimes challenging that come up? as that stakeholder who sometimes, you could be the person that shuts it down or approves it. What are some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I like to give my leaders a lot of autonomy over their budgets, what they think is really important. And exactly like Tyler said, in the budgeting process, there's boundaries, there's envelopes. But I really want to give my leaders the opportunity to switch out tech or change how they're spending their money. And I'm here as a thought partner, and I will help you buy technology that you need. I will help you think about headcount planning. Obviously have strong opinions about these things, but I'm not the type of CFO that gets sent like business cases for every single thing that we buy and I sign off on ROI or a business case. However, what I will say is that the one question I've been asking lately is, tell me about this company's AI roadmap, because they can put a beautiful business case in front of me, but this company won't be around if they don't have an
Wow,
investment in
interesting.
AI. So
Yeah.
just tell me about their roadmap. What are they doing? Just show it to me. So I think as a sales leader, you need to know that we're asking those questions. And you need to have a story, and you need to have a roadmap, and you need to be implementing things
Yeah.
that will help you grow in this respect, or you probably will cease to exist in a few years. So that's one of my key questions I've been asking lately.
And between you both, I'm curious just to what are the kind of 2 or 3 most common things that you would want to see from a note? Say, you get a note from your CMO. Hey, here's this thing that came up. I know we're trying to, let's say go up market this year. Here's the thing that my team, we've been testing or heard about from a peer. We really have high conviction that we should add this, mid-year. What are some of the, kind of immediate things that would make it an easy yes or no, if it was included in, kind of a few bullet points to your office?
I think and we're talking about purchasing or tools and things like this on a
services or tools
case
or
by case.
partners,
We're trying to do we try to write a business case for everything we're buying, and unfortunately on the go-to-market side there can be a proliferation of tools, right? And because everybody has the fancy new thing, and then there's a lot of overlap and things like that. And so the business case has to justify the need but also the outcome. And that outcome, I don't want to be too draconian and say, hey, you just can't do it, right? But if somebody wants to spend some money on stuff, it's like, okay, then you got to use it, and you got to kind of hold your folks accountable, as opposed to throw it in. What I don't like is niche products that are only going to be used by a piece of an organization. And okay, if you have your AEs and your hunters or something like that, a product that one region likes, maybe Europe, they want it for there, but there's going to be something different in North America, because I think that creates disparity across the kind of whole thing on how you run the business.
And admin
so
work, right?
That's the kind of
things take time to enable and whatever. So if you have 17 of those, maybe it's best in class, but now you're spending whatever time and money and attention. That's definitely a cost that people don't
and that's different than doing it's different than doing a pilot, right? Because a pilot is, hey, let's test it with the goal of rolling it out holistically. But having a disparity across solutions or the way that we're running go-to-market motions, global, those are the things that I would shut down pretty quick. In general, though, across spend, it's not really you hire professionals to be able to run their organizations, and our job is to partner and also kind of be the guardians of the business model at the highest level. And so when we think about go-to-market spend, we start at the highest level. We have a concept called GEI, or Growth Efficiency Index, and we kind of get agreement on what efficiency looks like. But then as you peel back the layers, there's got to be autonomy for folks to make decisions. And then even, some of those decisions, there'll be bad decisions, some will be good decisions. So placing bets is actually kind of important. But the trick is, okay, how are you going to measure against these things so you know if stuff is working or not? And that's also FP&A's job to help out with that. But that is rigor and, actually requiring, if you're making a bet, that people go on in and using it, and then actually having the discipline to measure it and say, okay, that worked or that didn't, as opposed to, let's buy a bunch of stuff or do a bunch of events and then never do a look back on what worked and what didn't.
Totally. Yeah. Showing that you thought through those things, I think, are important. And yeah, again, you're talking about being a good partner to just showing you've done that work and thought. I think a lot of people skip that and they're just like, but this thing is so important. It's like, okay, why help me translate that to your world? Because, you live in marketing or you live in sales or you live in CS. Okay. That may just organically make sense to you, but helping other people understand that who do have the responsibility to the business for, where money goes.
I think if it's done right, like Danielle started it, growth is paramount, right? And so, but there's also a fixed pie that can be spent across the entire company. And then at a management team level, if you can actually go in to the leaders and go to R&D and say, hey, if we actually hold off on some spend and give those dollars to go to market, if they can return back enough ARR, then I will actually give you more R&D spend 6 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
So that trade-off of, kind of having one section go on a diet and feed the other, that can be really healthy. The healthy parts come through accountability then, because then you got your R&D leaders saying, hey, I'm willing to do that and starve our group a little bit, but you need to make sure you get a return for this. And so then it becomes not, one person's problem, everybody's problem, but there is a true accountability and, kind of not a tension, but a good kind of, I guess it is tension across the groups that way. And I think those things can be actually healthy for an organization.
Maybe one thread to pull on, Tyler, that you said is around that, constant evaluation, making sure products are actually being used and we're getting an ROI from them. I think that is something that we need to do constantly and look at our tech stack, look at what's important for us for next year. And so maybe for the revenue and growth leaders, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of CS people who are like listening in on this too. Like I cannot tell you how many times we have, implemented a solution that we signed a very short-term contract on. We were experimenting and we got rid of it the next year because we just had very poor CS involvement on the other side and didn't really enable our team well. Like maybe the tool was amazing and it just didn't enable us and we displaced it with something better or different. So I would say that like the follow-on on CS is just so critical. And I don't always see that happening well across the board.
How would you want either yourself or your team engaging with a vendor, whether it's technology, whether it's service, post-signature? Because again, I think we have a really good, notes into the CFO, hey, this thing, but like you're saying after, I don't think there's a really strong playbook around that. Like, what's the cadence? Do you want to be involved in EBR? Is it just updates? Like, what kind of things do you want either yourself or your stakeholders on your organization hearing from to make sure you have visibility? Because sometimes it does happen, you just don't hear about it. And then they're kind of like having to tell the story, 10 days into, renewal or something. So
Totally.
Danielle,
I mean, help me help you. Like I have a lot to do. I can't analyze the usage or the productivity of every single tool that we have. Like I can't do that. So help me do that. Like be my champion, be your tools champion, send us quarterly what our engagement looks like, how we can be using it better. Like, I actually just don't see that done very well, honestly. So I would love more support to do that. And you'll have more success with keeping our technology in place. It's just will be more ingrained in our culture and our business if you do that.
Totally. And Tyler, what about yourself?
I agree. And look, Freshworks is not great at this either, but it is surprising to me how many companies that they go in and they build a solution to promote, what would potentially be, a best practice in processes or the way you're running some function. Yet the promotion of what best practice isn't actually there after you buy. It's just go use a solution.
They're not living what they're pitching.
Or even helping after, right? Like the pitch at the beginning is, hey, this is best practice and everything, dude, but you buy the solution, it's like, There's nothing in there on nudges of, hey, you should be doing this, right? And that's not best practice or a constant kind of learning. And so then the customers kind of up to their own devices to try to figure it out, even though they might have a solution that can help them. And when software providers specifically go do that, then you're not just providing the solution, you're actually becoming part of the actual operations of the business, and then you become pretty mission critical. When you're not, then it looks like just another software. There was a while here we had such a proliferation of tools that if we kind of put in a rule that you wanted to buy something, you had to get rid of two. And sometimes you turn these things off and you realize nobody's using them. Like you don't even miss a beat, and that's pretty kind of scary in my mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of it's people are buying technology for an outcome and an impact on their business, not for the technology itself. And I think we can get lost in that a lot. And I think you can actually, especially if you're a startup trying to compete with some pretty big names out there, you can actually provide more impact by partnering more closely with the organization and actually having that strong usage or measurable outcomes on things as, having 50% of the features because you're delivering on the promise. People are using it and you're sharing those best practices as a true partner versus just big company name, got the contract across the line, but then there wasn't a lot of enablement or support because they didn't think they needed to do that to get the renewal. So I think there's a huge opportunity, especially Danielle mentioning these new AI companies and a lot of challengers to larger tech and tools out there. I think there's an amazing opportunity to displace a lot of folks that I think have gotten lazy in terms of servicing their customers. Cool. Shifting gears, we've talked a bit about how revenue leaders can partner more effectively with the office of the CFO. We've talked a bit about both deals internally, but also doing business with external third parties. Maybe zooming out a little bit, I'd love to get your takes on just the last few years. There's just been crazy whiplash, especially in the tech world, this massive boom for almost a decade. And then on top of that, kind of COVID boom for a lot of companies, and then this huge pullback and consolidation. And now kind of this one thread for AI, another thread for just challenging macro conditions. I'm curious to hear where you both think things are going in both 2025 and kind of the near term, and some of the key kind of macro trends that you're tracking and how that impacts the way that you're planning for your business. So Danielle, I'll pass the mic over to you and kind of just, as you're doing your job, planning all these things, like what's in the back of your mind? You mentioned AI, like, are there kind of two or three things that, you're kind of trying to keep up to date with to make sure you're seeing around those corners?
Yeah. I mean, I think CFOs have been in like the hurt locker a little bit the last few years. It's been tough, like not knowing where our next meal is coming from, capital not being deployed. So we've had to make a lot of really tough decisions for the business. And it was the right decisions to make because, like I said, without capital being deployed, we had to make sure we were getting closer to profitability. And I know every CFO had to go through that and every leadership team had to go through that. So that was tough. I am an eternal optimist. The last few years were very incongruent to how I operate. I like to take risk. I like to spend money on innovation. So yeah, that was really hard for me. But I definitely learned a lot in the process. But thinking ahead into 2025. Again, caveat this with I'm an optimist. I really think we're going to see a lot more deals get done in 2025. I'm already seeing it. There's a lot of dry powder. We're going to have to start seeing deployment of capital, depending on where these funds are in their life cycle. Some of these funds that have deployed a lot of capital already in the 2020 era, they're going to be looking for very, very high quality assets because some of the assets that they invested in the 2020, 2021 era are not doing very well.
The bar's basically higher because of that.
Totally. Yeah. Then there are some newer funds that won't have as much of that like strict criteria. So, as people are thinking about going out and raising money, I think that's really important. Where are these folks are in their fund life?
Mhm.
But regardless, I really think that we're going to see a lot more deployment of capital, even despite all the turmoil in the US right now. I still think we're going to see a lot. And I've already seen a lot of deals getting done. I'm following healthcare much more closely than other industries, but I've seen some really interesting deals get done even in the last month. More M&A is happening. PE is coming in, smashing some things together. I'm very excited about 2025. Like so pumped to get back to growth. So that's what's on my mind.
I like that prediction. Let's hope that one. Let's hope that one sticks.
I'm just excited.
And Tyler, how about yourself and more on the public market side?
Yeah, I think we have earnings next week for last year, and then we'll give those our fiscal, so we'll give guidance and all of that. We have an interesting business, right? We have two different product lines: EX products and CX products. EX being kind of for anchored by Freshservice, which is our solution for IT, and then CX kind of anchored by Freshdesk, which is support. The reason is not two products isn't really interesting. The interesting part is we're selling from the SMB all the way up to now large enterprise, and with on a global basis. And so in the past, we've been kind of a recipient to broader macroeconomic pressures. If they happen to SMB or as interest rates increase, you see a decrease in spending. I agree with Danielle. I think we're coming out of a lot of that, and I think that in general, it's not like companies are going back to hiring, which we have historically been an agent model, even though we are moving more to a lot of AI kind of consumption-based things. That you have to be in control of your own business model. So if your historical methods of growth or expansion aren't going to be there, you have to figure out a different way to grow with your customer base or to acquire new customers. And being in control of your own destiny in terms of spend and everything else, allowing you to go through these transitions are super important. And I think, for us, we've seen that pressure for the last couple of years. So we've kind of been working on it for a while. On the SMB side, you could just see there's a variety of folks who've already reported, and it's bad. And I think what's going to end up happening is that companies and even little organizations are going to be very fickle in the way they spend. I think there's a lot of spend that's happening, but you got to go earn it as a company. You can't just show up. And there's so many choices from a software perspective that you have to differentiate yourself, but you also have to deliver the promise that you're making. And if you don't, you're going to languish, I think. And so it's a good challenge, right? But the market opportunities for most of us are huge. So you just got to go execute against it.
I completely agree. That's kind of the theme of everything we're trying to do with the XKO execution. It's the opportunities are out there. And this isn't the turn, post-COVID where, mass layoffs, all this stuff. Like, yes, it's just harder out there. And there are opportunities and there are, chunks of the market that are doing super well and growing super fast. There are others that are pulling out, and you have to be much more thoughtful about the opportunities you're focused on and which ones you aren't. But yeah, like you said, people are looking to solve problems out there more than ever. I actually think that it's really good pressure if you have a great product and can deliver that. I think those types of partners can stand out even more because of the pressure. And before it was kind of like, oh, it doesn't matter. We buy this thing, we buy that thing. No, like you can be core key partners, part of the few that really make it when people are pulling out, like you said, Tyler. Like that's what we're seeing. Get rid of 2 or 3 things for one. That's the status quo today. But now you can be that one. That wasn't the opportunity before. No one would spend time with you because you're just growing and hiring. Now we're finding people want to spend more time with the folks that they're invested in. So I do think that's kind of the silver lining in this type of market. This was, super informative conversation. I got a lot of things to think about for my own business and how we partner both internally and externally with the office of the CFO. And hopefully, folks out there listening got a different perspective on both how to engage with their partners and also with their customers. So thank you so much for both taking the time out of your busy days and this time of year to share some learnings and insights with the community.
Yeah. Thank you, Ross and Danielle. A great conversation. So
yeah, thank you. Great conversation, both of you.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. We're talking all about this topic that is near and dear to my heart, both as a CMO, as well as a CMO who is selling go-to-market AI technology. So this is the something of a sweet spot for me. So again, thanks to our friends at Accord for putting this on. It's super, super valuable stuff. And hopefully you find this session valuable. So let's jump right in. We're talking about how to unify the go-to-market using AI. And something that I think is really important to keep in mind is you hear about this every single day, especially if you're like me and you go on LinkedIn every day. This is dead, outbound's dead, SEO dead, everything is dead. Well, I have news for you. The channels themselves are not dead. What is dead is the playbooks that we're running. And so this is what you need to reinvent. You shouldn't just dismiss outright a channel because you see somebody post about it on LinkedIn. You should dismiss a channel if you're executing on it poorly. So we're going to talk about how do we get here? Well, the reason that these channels are inefficient, the reason that the old playbooks are dead is because what we have done, you and I, we're equally culpable here, is we have scaled plays and scaled playbooks that are both inefficient and ineffective. Oh, we're not getting enough response to our cold emails. Let's just send more emails and then it'll all come out in the wash. Like we've scaled plays that are inefficient and ineffective. We're having a hard time generating leads. Let's just pump as many dollars into search engine marketing as we can and generate more leads. Like inefficient, ineffective. And what this has led to is this problem that's pervasive across go-to-market. It's this problem of go-to-market bloat. It's all of these investments in processes and tools and spend categories and channels and all the things, all these investments that we've made that are yielding underperformance, yielding inefficiency, yielding bad results, negative ROI. And this is what AI can really help change, flip the script on. We can go from this universe of a really bloated go-to-market to a universe of a frictionless, high-velocity go-to-market engine. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the goal of this, as you think about where is the right place to infuse AI into my go-to-market engine, the goal is that you're at this intersection of a strategy that is comprehensive and systematic across the entire org. If all you do is try and optimize for a component of the go-to-market process, send better emails. And we're going to use AI to write our outbound emails. And that's all you do, you're going to be left wanting because you haven't actually solved the systematic strategic problem of infusing AI across the go-to-market engine. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to explore these 3 use cases that many of us have been trained to think of as different use cases. Oh, we have a team for outbound marketing and we have a team for account-based marketing. We have a team for that are doing deal coaching and deal management. And we've been trained to think of these things as separate topics with separate people that are responsible for executing on them. Well, I have news for you. All of these are part of a go-to-market engine, and they can and should be as interwoven as if they were a single thing that you're executing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. AI makes it easier to do this. AI makes it easier for the left hand to know what the right hand is doing and to make sure that all of your go-to-market efforts are as coordinated as possible. Before I get into this, though, my dog is whining at the door because this is a live event and these kind of things happen. So she is now out of the office and we can proceed. All right, so outbound prospecting. How do we think about doing effective prospecting? The thing about the outbound channel, and again, it's not dead, the playbook is dead. The thing about the outbound channel that separates it from the rest of the sales and marketing channels, at least that I'm aware of, is it is the only channel that really allows you to get the right message to the right people at the right accounts at the right time. It's the intersection of all 4 of those things. Name me another channel that allows you to do that. Can you do that with ad serving? I don't think so. Can you do that with direct mail? I don't think so. Like this is the only way that I'm aware of that you can get the right message to the right people at the right accounts at the right time. But to do that, you need to actually do real research. It's not just a numbers game where you're blasting out irrelevant emails to as many people as possible, just crossing your fingers and hoping that you're checking all those boxes. What you need to do is you need to have a really in-depth understanding of, first, your company. Like, what are your value props? But beyond your value props, what are the strategic initiatives behind the reasons that your value props matter? It's not just that, to use Copy AI as an example, we can help with AI-generated content. That's not the value prop. The value prop is a company has a multi-industry go-to-market. And we can help them take a piece of content that was written for manufacturing and re-swizzle it for financial industry. Like that is the strategic initiative that we need to attach ourselves to. So really have a good understanding of your value props in the context of why people buy your software, the real reasons, the reason behind the reason why people buy your software. So that's number one. Number two, we can put AI to work to go and do really deep research on accounts and on people. Now, when we put AI to work to go do research on accounts, what we're doing is we're codifying the best practices ways that a human would go do research on those accounts. So using AI, you can codify the exact questions that you ask and answer about every account that you care about. What are they hiring for? What is the CEO talking about? Press releases, product launches, interviews, industry trends, a little bit about their sales process. When does their fiscal year start? Whatever it is that you're interested in, AI is very good at doing this research and synthesizing that into a meaningful account plan that you can use to inform your outbound prospecting. AI can do the same thing for contact research, real intelligence about the people that you're reaching out to, way more than where'd they go to school and what's their title. Like that's not real contact intelligence. What we need to understand is what have been their public appearances, podcasts, webinars they've been on, what are they posting about on LinkedIn, what's top of mind for them so that we can have real useful ideas of how we can sell into them, market into them with sales angles that are going to be resonant. And then personal knowledge, to the extent that we can understand what makes a person tick, that makes our outbound messaging all the better. And so the kind of workflow orientation that you may see here is codifying all the different areas that you want to do research on. I mentioned them, I rattled them off already. I'm not going to do it again, but you see that list of things that you can train the AI to go out and do research on. And then on the right side of the screen here, you see a little bit of a synthesis of all of this research that is connected to my value prop at Copy AI. So now I've done all of this. I've trained AI to do all of this research that used to take me a couple hours to do as a person. Now I get this initial report done in minutes, and now I can use this to inform my outbound prospecting. The problem that often exists is if, and it's a pretty big if, but if this account planning process was ever even done, it was done by an SDR, sales development rep, or maybe done by a salesperson or something like that, and that account plan falls into some black hole. It's in their notes app. It's somewhere on a private computer where nobody else can access it. And that's a major problem because what it means is that you have one set of research that's powering one channel in your go-to-market mix, your outbound channel, but it's not being used by anybody else. So the goal of outsourcing the research to AI is not just to make the research better. It's also to make sure that the outputs of that research, what we were looking at on the previous screen, making sure that those outputs make them or put themselves in a place where everybody across your go-to-market engine has access to them. It's in a Google Drive folder somewhere, SharePoint, or it's shared in a Teams channel, or it's in the CRM. It's somewhere that's actually accessible by everybody across your business. So you can avoid this black hole problem, and you can make sure that everybody across your go-to-market engine for account-based marketing, for sales, for post-sales, for whatever it is, has access to all that high-fidelity research that you've done. That is a segue into the next use case that we're talking about here, account-based marketing. If you have all of that research, notice the Venn diagram on this page is very similar to the Venn diagram on the outbound prospecting page. To do great account-based marketing, we need to really understand our accounts. And often what a lot of people do is they say, yeah, of course we do account-based marketing. One page has a Pepsi logo and the other page has a Coca-Cola logo. That's ABM. It's like, no, it is not ABM. All you've done is a logo swap. Not interesting to the buyer. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a great buyer experience. Now, if you've already done the research that's informing your outbound prospecting, that same research on the accounts that you're reaching out to, on the contacts you're reaching out to, the industry research that you've done, whatever it may be, that same research can be used to power the assets that make up your account-based marketing mix. And the virtue of this, taking the same sales angles that you just saw and turning them into ABM assets, is now what the person sees in the ads that they get, and the landing pages that they get, and the events they get invited to, and the long form content they see from your company is the same exact topics, the same themes, the same value props as the outbound channel. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing. And now you're starting to create a very unified buyer experience. I can't tell you both as somebody who's been practicing SDR and demand gen type stuff for a dozen years, and who's on the receiving end of a lot of this type of thing, the outbound and the ads and all the rest, it's very rare for there to be total coordination and total cohesion between what the sales team is saying about the product they're selling and what the market. So now you can unify all of that process to make sure that the buyer experience, what they realize is consistency. And that is a huge, huge part of what we're trying to do here from an outbound standpoint, from an ABM standpoint, is build awareness. You're going to build awareness better if you're consistent in the messaging that you're bringing to the table. And so instead of your marketing channels, remember we talked about before, the old playbook for search engine marketing is just flushing money down the toilet and hoping that one of your arrows hits the target. We're going to serve these keywords and just hope that we find the right people because their search intent or whatever it may be. Instead of that approach, now we know what the messaging should be. Now we know what ads to serve, what content to serve, what landing page experience to create. We know because we've done the research. So instead of shooting all these different arrows and just hoping and praying that something hits the mark, now you can more or less guarantee that that right message is going to be getting in front of those right people at the right accounts at the right time. And your outbound channel and your ABM channel are as unified as possible. Remember, we're trying to unify the go-to-market experience. Now, those are both top of funnel things. How are we building awareness? How are we educating the market about what we do? How are we making sure that we're keeping the top of funnel filled? And that's very useful. But this is a living, breathing exercise. And most companies do not do this. Most companies from an outbound standpoint say, okay, we got the opportunity created, our work here is done. Or most ABM marketing teams will say, hey, you know, we got that lead in the door, MQL, MQA, our work here is done. That's not it. It's not it, because the deal's not signed yet. You haven't actually generated any revenue. All you've done is create an opportunity, which is great and very hard, but don't pat yourselves on the back too soon. The assets that you create, the outbound channel that you have, the ABM channel that you have, and all of the downstream deliverables are living and breathing. And you're going to learn more about how to position yourself after every single call that you have. So as you're managing deals, what are you going to get now? You're going to get call transcripts where you're going to get you're going to get your hypotheses tested. So you may think you know what the right sales angles are. You may think you know what strategic initiatives matter to executives, but you may be wrong. And you're going to find that strategic initiative A is more important than B. And so we're going to sell against that. And now that you have these transcripts, you can use those sales call transcripts to inform the way that you continue to iterate on the types of things that you are processing. And the types of things that you're creating. So if you look here, you see a version of a transcript. We use Gong internally, so this is a screenshot of Gong. And then you see the AI going to work and saying, what is happening or not happening inside of this account? And what should we do differently as a result of this? This is a laundry list of recommendations that the AE could take in order to strengthen this deal. But it's the same sort of thing that an ABM marketer could take, or that an SDR who's still engaged with this account could take to help with the multi-threading, to help with the message resonance, to help create the surround sound so that the buyer experience is as good as possible. And the reason that this is so important is because often the sales reps, this is the experience for sales reps. All right, sales rep, here's the opportunity. Good luck. And they just go base jumping and just hope that they can close some account, hope they don't die. That's not a good way to run a deal cycle, especially now. B2B deals are so much more complicated than that, and it requires a much more unified approach. So if you really think about your go-to-market engine as being connected, as being a living, breathing exercise, as being a mechanism for delivering that hyper-consistent, hyper-relevant messaging to all of the members of the buying group at whatever stage in the deal cycle, this is how you're going to start to really have a flywheel type approach where the research that you do for your outbound informs a lot of your inbound channels, informs the way that you're managing deals and selling against those strategic initiatives, which will then inform the way that you outbound to that same company or to the next company that's having a similar sort of set of problems. And this is the way that you can create this really useful surround sound experience for every member of the buying group inside of the account. You are sharp on the research that you've done. So you're sharp on the strategic initiatives you're selling against. You are ensuring that every single touch point that every member of the buying group sees is thematically linked. I know I sound like a broken record, but every ad, every piece of content, every event they get invited to, every outbound email is all consistent. And this is the way that you really start to build a groundswell. You really show the account and show the members of the buying group that you understand what they're trying to make happen and that you can help. And this is what's been missing. This is the old, this doesn't exist. Like this playbook, this is the playbook we all know we should be running. If I asked you, what is the best, most optimal way to break into any single account, you would tell me, do all these things. And then I would say to you, okay, now we need to do that for 1,000 accounts. Yeah, oh, no, we can't do that. Well, now you can. Now you can by finding the right processes to outsource to AI, finding the right ways to infuse those AI workflows across your go-to-market strategy so that everything is as connected as possible. That is what we are all responsible for doing today. This is what the operators of today have to do, is we have to rethink a lot of the playbooks. Think about the channel. The channels are the channels. They're not changing and they're not dead. But what they need is they need an injection of new energy. They need a newness. They need a new playbook for what is possible to do today that was not possible to do before. And if you take the time and energy to really infuse AI across all of these different plays that you're running across the whole go-to-market engine, you will stand out head and shoulders above the crowd, and you will unify your own internal team. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful. I'm always around. If you have any questions or comments about any of this, you can track me down on LinkedIn, and I hope to hear from you then. Thanks so much.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I wouldn't have wanted to kick off with anyone else than these three leaders as they dive into what truly sets the best companies apart. That's not just the product, but it's really authentic leadership these days and go-to-market execution. CEOs aren't just building companies these days. They're personally representing their brands, aligning their teams around a clear vision, and navigating through changes like the next generation of technology and AI. Today, I'm joined by three incredible leaders who are doing just that, representing their brands in incredible ways. First, we have Alina, the co-founder and co-CEO of Chili Piper. You might know her from building in public, and not just from their amazing product, and building a very people-first culture and innovative approach to go-to-market. We also have Evan, CEO and co-founder of User Evidence, who's helped companies turn customer proof into powerful revenue drivers. And last but not least, we have Chris, the CEO of Sendoso, who's pioneered a category of sending-driven engagement, bringing that personal approach to kind of mass email stuff that we're all used to, and knows firsthand how to drive pipeline with creativity and connection. So thank you so much for everyone being here today and taking time out of your busy schedules.
Thank you, Ross, for having us.
Of course, of course. So as we get into it, Alina, we'll start off with you. And something that we're seeing a lot more of these days, not just in business, but I think in politics and kind of, people are craving this in other industries, is hearing directly from leaders and in their authentic voices and not just the kind of artificial brands. From building in public, sharing your real stories, wins and losses and lessons in LinkedIn. Why do you think people are craving this, again, both in the personal side and the business world? And what is really resonating about sharing this journey, and how has that impacted Chili Piper today?
Well, first, let me tell you, I was terrified of being a Chili Piper evangelist and being the face of the company. It was like a fear of death and this, so there was like nothing in between. And the catalyst for me to be a lot more visible, and with the ups and downs that are happening around me, was realizing that I have no choice but to be who I am, and realizing that everybody around me is a lot more skeptical of people that show up with a script. Everybody is more skeptical when they see a post generated by AI. We're all having a harder time to distinguish online what's real and what's not, and what's AI generated and what's not. And when I show up with all the imperfections that I have, like the crazy hair today because I've been in the waves, and like the background from Miami, like
I was gonna say, where are you, by the way? Miami, cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
I figured I have to show up in a kickoff destination. Comes with risks, because like you might see in the background some people that might not belong in a professional setting, or I might show up not fully aligned with what people might expect me to be. And I've taken that risk, but I think that us as leaders, unless we understand that we're going to be criticized no matter what, and we're going to be imperfect no matter what, if we don't take that risk, we're not real leaders. So I've learned to grow out of that uncertainty and out of that fear to start feeling comfortable with who I am.
Yeah, Chris and Evan, does that resonate with you guys, or go for it?
Oh, you, Chris.
I was just going to say, chiming into that, one of the things that I've experienced that I've been trying to cope with or handle is handling both like my personal brand and the corporate brand at the same time. And one of the kind of subsidiaries of that is that kind of my personal brand is related to me being the founder and this founder story. but oftentimes now we're selling to enterprise CMOs who like maybe care less about like my entrepreneur founder story, but want to hear about our product vision and other ways that we're evolving like go-to-market category. So that's one of the things I've kind of struggled with is like my personal brand and what I know really well, but with what the corporate brand wants to see out in the market for our customers.
Yeah, I think like my if my voice is authentic, it sounds weird to say that, but like that's maybe stemmed from laziness. Like I couldn't reset my password on Twitter for a long time, so I just haven't had a Twitter account. And Facebook's obviously its own thing, useful for buying stuff on Marketplace, but as a social network, not so much. Like my only social network is LinkedIn, and which I think is actually good because it encourages me to share some of myself too, just because like any other human, I want that sort of positive feedback loop and the likes and whatever. But it also brings, I think, at least for an early stage startup, a rounded humanness to a lot of the more product oriented, corporate vision oriented stuff. That just makes it more, I don't know, entertaining and just normal to look at versus like this kind of sanitized, official press memo from a business.
It's the sanitization that bothers me a lot, and that corporate facade that I had to endure for 20 years before I started Chili Viper in my corporate world, and I felt exhausted from it. So I think that it's my laziness as well.
And kind of tying it back to, because I don't think it's just easier and more fun. I think it actually does have a lot of results in terms of impact for the business. So Alina, what have you seen in terms of the feedback that you've gotten and some of the impact on the business?
So as scary as that sounds, my social media posts influence half of our pipeline right now. And wow. I 49% to be more precise. So the way we do that is that we take my social media posts, we look at engagement per account, and we see if that account is in an open pipeline with us, and we look like at the overlap.
Totally, Chris, Alina, any tips for other folks that are trying to activate, again, not just themselves, but the whole company behind this kind of strategy?
One of the tactical things we did is we have a channel in Slack called Social where we encourage employees to post their postings. And that drives this kind of incubation of people amplifying other posts, celebrating each other, dropping a bunch of emojis for a colleague's good post. And it really encourages this like team sport versus at times, I think social posting is kind of solo mode. So that was just a small tactical thing that we've seen an increase, and we've seen a lot of people post a lot more because of that.
In our case, we actually encourage people to create a brand from themselves. So the way you were saying, Chris, that you're creating a brand for yourself, I think that's very valuable for my employees. I think that they can get better salaries outside. I know I'm an unusual founder that way, but I really believe that would help them in their new roles because they're bringing their audience with them, and that's very valuable for companies. And they know because they've seen some former employees getting double salary somewhere else, and they know that it's worth putting the effort into it. Not everybody feels comfortable to be as controversial as I am and as transparent as I am, but everybody has like different levels of understanding that is valuable. And in addition, some of my most successful sales people right now in the team are also creating a lot of pipeline from social, so they know that it's the real deal. My marketers are also creating a lot of coverage and a lot of distribution, and they understood the mission that if they want to convert attention into a pipeline, they have to get better at the skill of doing that. So the entire company is moving towards that. So we have what we call takeovers. So in the calendar, we block time for everybody with certain mission, with what to do, and we have templates and some gifts and things that we allow them to use. But we encourage everybody to use their own voice and not to use our templates. But Chris, what we've noticed is that if we post we used to have like a Slack channel as well where we all posted things, but we noticed that it actually decreases engagement, so we don't do that anymore. We let them find each other organically. LinkedIn penalizes that for whatever reason. Then we keep learning from one another. We have another channel that's called Creative Channel where we learn tips and algorithm. When we notice that the algorithm has changed and we can do something a little bit different, we share this knowledge so that we can all get better. So that's what we keep active.
Have you ever experimented with boosting like good organic posts through LinkedIn's like paid thought leadership posts? That's something I've thought about recently, but we haven't done too much of yet.
So on the boosting organic, when we notice that the customer has said something that's adjacent to a topic that we cover, we actually go and say, hey, do you mind adding Chili Piper into that post? Obviously, only if they feel comfortable, and then we put paid spend behind it of that customer post. And that is something that we've done, but that doesn't apply to our company. It just applies to the customers.
Yeah, we do a little bit of both. Like the boosted paid customer posts are great ones. We boast a few of our more thought leadership-y type ones, especially if we have like a big data-driven report behind it that's like really meaty, high-value content. Then that's worth trying to drive additional traffic. And it's just you're comparing the paid engagement versus other paid channels, which oftentimes it's it performs just as well or if not better.
Totally. Maybe backing up a bit, and Chris, this one's for you, since I know Sendoso specializes so much in this kind of personalized engagement in a world that just seems filled with more and more unpersonalized kind of spam in the SDRs built by AI, all this kind of stuff. How do you think building an authentic brand as both your company and employees as well as yourself ties in with this idea of I think people craving the authenticity and personalization? How do you think about the intersection of those two things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think maybe I'll break it down into a few sub areas where I think when you think about authentic brand, authentic leadership, you kind of have to be, hey, how are you authentic to your team, and what kind of team leadership internally are you doing? And I think for me, that's being involved in special projects, skip level one-on-ones, collaborating with my team whenever possible. Albeit one challenge there for me was, in the very early Series A days, it was easy for me to get my hands dirty, and people like that. As we started to scale Series B, C longer, it was almost scary for some employees to see a Slack from me, and they almost were overwhelmed and worried that something was wrong. And so there was a bit of, how do I position my my excitement and leadership skills as the company scales? So I think there's authentic leadership as it relates to the team. I think there's thought leadership, which is what I think we've been talking about so far, which is how do you come about on podcasts, on intimate field events, social posts. I think that's a critical component. And then I think how you show up to your customers in kind of that authentic leadership. I do big customer roadshow meeting with hundreds of customers every year. I try to ping 10-20% of all prospects, putting myself out there, offering up time, participating in cabs. And so I feel like that's another really critical component, seeing that. But again, challenges there being that if I want to go meet with a customer, I've got to know product usage, our roadmap, our support, all of our interactions. Basically, I need to be as smart as the CSM times 10. And that comes with challenges. But luckily, new recent AI tools are popping up, making that easier. But it's always easy to say, hey, I want to go talk to a customer, but you got to come prepared. So, yeah. But I think all those things create great leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the AI tools for that use case, actually better personalizing it and feeling like you're more intimate with the account. Whereas there's other cases that kind of share the opposite, right? It's like, oh, you just we've known each other for years, and why should I get this blanket email from someone or this brand that I've actually engaged with or been a customer of? So it's really interesting to see how people can, again, it's just a tool, and it's really how you use it.
Exactly.
Evan, back to you, and we're going to shift gears a little bit from this authentic leadership idea to how does that come across in our go-to-market execution? Would love to hear from you what some of your big bets are this year at User Evidence as you think about kicking off the year. I know we're already about a month and a half into it, as if you can believe, in 25, and how you're thinking about using AI to hit those goals.
Yeah, ironically, the whole theme of our kickoff in Nashville last month was Let It Ride, which is kind of a mashup of our Wyoming Jackson Hole roots and this desire to encourage the team to make big bets and take creative risks. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously like my background. I started my career as an SDR. Like, you used to be able to just rip 1,000 emails and schedule 17 meetings, and obviously, if you just do more of that, that's great. But that job has gotten so freaking hard. It is so incredibly noisy out there. Email as a channel, period, has just like gotten so rough. we've seen some good traction through cold calls, but yeah, I think our big bets this year, one that I won't talk too much detail about, but events, I think, is an opportunity to, you talk about bringing authenticity and creativeness to an event. I think that's something that we think about deeply, and what is our brand, what is our roots, how can we bring something that's different to the market and interesting and then a pattern interrupt relative to other stuff out there. Yeah, I think maybe that theme kind of goes through all of the channels that we can potentially communicate is, how can we, I think our biggest asset as a small team of smart people is our creativity and our ability to stand out. So I look for channels where that gets highlighted. Email is a tough one, right? Because you might spend 4 hours on an email, but they might not even read it, right? Even if it's the most targeted thing, if you use the most sophisticated AI tooling behind it to get targeted, whatever. But account-based marketing, creating experiences, obviously stuff like Sendoso, I think, is a great canvas to be able to show your creativity. I think our most popular or most effective gift last year was a foam roller for athletes that one of our reps kept sending out, and that thing just got meetings. So yeah, I look for channels where you can really showcase the creative, authentic version of yourself in an interesting way.
It's interesting that so many, our conversations so far around leadership, around some of these bets are so top of funnel focused. I think that's a reflection of kind of how the market feels and leaders, across the four of us CEOs. It's like a lot of what we spend time thinking about. So just kind of an interesting trend I'm already kind of picking up from this conversation. Well, passing it off to Alina for the next one. Obviously, you've been really focused not just on the product side, but now, leading all things on marketing and pipe generation. How are you thinking about, building on some of the kind of unique strategies that we were talking about recently from 2024 going into this year?
In our case, obviously, events is a big channel for us, and social is also another big one. I'm finding, like you all do, and everybody in the market, that all the channels are getting noisier because of AI. Sales is a lot harder, marketing is a lot harder. And me, I'm an engineer, and 2 years ago, I decided to take this role as an acting CMO, and it was the hardest job of my life. It was literally the hardest job, because all of a sudden, not only I needed all my engineering chops to make all these channels very efficient, but I also needed to have all the data to see what's working and what's not working and what to double down on and what not. And then on top of it, you have to have extreme creativity and extreme people relationship skills to be able to make partnership work and to make a relationship with influencers and all that. So it was like a very hard combination of skills that I did not possess at the time when I started. And right now we have about 26 channels that are working in marketing, and
Wow. That's a lot of channels.
It's a lot of channels, yeah. And we work with a lot of fractional help to make those channels work, because otherwise it's hard to be like super good at one particular channel on your own. It's much better to bring the experts that can help you drive the channels as best as they can possibly can. For us, the channels that have lowest CAC, lowest cost of acquisitions are partnerships, and we double down on those a lot. It's a lot easier when you go to market with several people that with nodes that activate talk about you on your behalf, and that's another big bet that we're going to expand on this year. And we have both product partnerships and ecosystem partnerships to drive those things. And we do a lot of things with B2B influencers as well, a lot. I'm actually creating a course on it, on precisely how we approach it, how I find the influencers, how much I pay them, how I go about creating content with them, with examples, and kind of the results we got. And I'm creating it in a Notion doc. I'm not going to make it gated. I want to share what I've learned so far, because I think if I share, I can just get better. Like, people can give me better tips. I don't mind if competitors start stealing my playbook, because you always have to be a bit ahead. But B2B influencer channel, like optimizing based on what my B2C marketers are doing, is like a big one for me.
That's an interesting thing you said on the playbook that you're creating with the influencers, which sounds incredibly valuable. We're about to start kind of ramping up our spend with influencers, so I'd love to read it. But I think that's another thing that we found that's working is like big rock really high quality content. Like we had this choice last year, like we were doing like a blog post every 3 days or whatever. And I think because the marginal cost to spin up just average short form content is so low, there's just, explosion of that. And our best performing content asset last year was like a 45-page, survey panel based original research report on this customer evidence gap thing that we talk about. And yes, I think, we're going from maybe 52 short format content assets. I'd rather do 6 just huge, big, long, meaty, high quality pieces. Something like Alina mentioned, I would obviously read the heck out of. So yeah, I think that is a formula that we'll see work, is just bigger, meatier content.
Yeah, content that's generated by AI, there's a dime a dozen. Really good content, very rare.
Right.
Totally. And I know, Chris, that you've done a lot in terms of like, I don't know if it's influencer marketing, but raving fans and using that as a growth channel. How have you seen that evolving over the years?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at kind of what I call our community as a strategy overall, and that includes our customer community, and that's a breakdown too of like our power users in marketing versus our power users in sales. We then really have a wide advisor network that's also part of this community that helps amplify our message and shows up on social channels with us, and as well as in content and panels, etc. And then we have, I consider our employees today and all of our alumni part of that community. We see a lot of alumni take other jobs because they want to, expand their career, but they're still Sendoso fans at heart, and we still embrace them to help spread the word. And then, we look at, kind of the paid side of things too, and investing in influencers as part of this community. But I think at the end of the day, you really just, this groundswell community is something that isn't just disrupted overnight with AI, and isn't something that takes a lot of time and effort, but is a channel in itself that keeps on delivering.
I love how you do that, Chris. And your employees are so good on social, all of them. They're so good.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen. Yeah, it does take effort, and I think we all have seen that. But another theme that I feel like is coming up is it's kind of doing the hard things. It's more about the execution that matters. Evan with the long form content, and Chris with how do you rally your whole company around that, and Alina with some of the things that you mentioned around work on the influence marketing and want to get better, and you don't care that the strategy's out there because it's the execution that makes the difference. That kind of seems like a common theme, especially with, again, email I felt like was previously ruined, and now even more so, and all this other pieces of content with AI. It's kind of like, how do we have that unique perspective and point of view that we're sharing, and building, the trust with those customers or ex-employees and all that stuff. Like, that's really where, and looking at our last year, I think it was 50 or 60% of our revenue came from folks that knew about us 12 months before, not just in the last year. And how do you build that trust and authenticity as a company, as individuals, seems like a really good, but like hard to replicate growth lever across companies, especially with how busy it is out there.
What you said is interesting about that too, that I think we've been a lot more intentional around this year. Like our Q4, which we had a big Q4, a lot of those deals, like it was attempts, like opportunity number 3, 4, 5, 6. So like particularly, if you're going to have like a tight set of target accounts, it might take, 9 opportunities to get into like a bigger account. So, there's so much focus, rightly so, obviously, around like net new pipeline generation. But now a lot of our content thought, paid thought goes into, kind of mid to late funnel, which is inclusive of like reviving old opportunities. And then also like, I think the expansion and bigger accounts, like for us, we can go from 25K to $500,000 within a year, that the close rate on those cross-sell opportunities is going to be so much higher. So your ad spend is naturally going to just be a lot more efficient there. So yeah, in addition to the new stuff, trying to think a lot about how we nurture existing, essentially.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Evan, too. We see a lot of our close one deals come from multiple opportunities that have been closed lost in the past. Even whether it's a customer too that left and came back, my big thing is like they always come back, or that could be a prospect who just said no at the time, but they're going to come back 6 months, a year later. So I think having a good foundational strategy to nurture, an opportunity that was closed lost, because I think a lot of companies or a lot of sales reps or account managers are like, that customer, that prospect's dead to me, I'm going to move on. But in reality, it's just like you still need to nurture that.
Yeah.
the long-term play. We have a lot of bounce backs as well, is something that's top of mind. I continue to nurture my close loss, and I continue to nurture my churn as well, because I know that my competitors will not deliver on what they say that they deliver. So I just wait for them. You're gonna come back. You'll see.
The long game does work. I remember, being a rep, you wouldn't really see the output of all your hard work until year 3 or year 4. And I see people with, careers that have sub 2-year stints, especially in sales or go to market. I'm like, you're not even seeing the output of anything that you've done, because it does take
stick
years.
around for the harvest, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like year 3, 4 is easy mode. If you've taken, a great approach to, building those relationships, all the no's, the top sellers are closing 1 out of 3 deals, 1 out of 4 deals, if it's more at market, or 5. Like, that means all of those other conversations and all the multi-threading and all the hard work across all those conversations doesn't pay off for years. And same thing with companies, right? You see a lot of companies that, boom and bust. I'm sure you've all seen competitors come up in your spaces at different times throughout your careers. It's the people that stay around and deliver on their promises. And again, that's kind of the not out strategizing, but kind of out executing, feels like the competitive advantage of a lot of the companies that I've seen do well over the years. Maybe the last question we can go through, like, how do you think about building a culture around that, right? How do you help other people understand that might have not been at companies like that? I think it's a lot of what I've seen is like retraining people that maybe been doing, these jobs in SaaS for 5 or 10 years that have a very short-term approach to working with customers or even at their jobs. How do you think about kind of sharing your vision and kind of the longer term approach to company building? Maybe Aline, I'll start with you.
Culture is probably one of the areas that I pay the most attention to, because I am only as strong as the execution of my teams and their motivation, and aligning them on what the things that matter is hyper top of mind for me. I'm focusing on a couple of areas. One is using AI agents for everything. AI agents are going to be pivotal to them expanding and not feeling overwhelmed or feeling that they can't achieve their goals. And the power of having 5,000 junior people working for you is real. Now, when they put you, how many employees you have, I feel like thousands, because I was creating all these AI agents. I don't know how to count employees. I don't know. And the way I encourage people to play with these agents, we make it part of everybody's role. Everybody can volunteer to build AI agents. Everybody can come up with ideas, and we share each other's learnings. And because everybody sees results, everybody feels empowered by it. And we also make it a condition. If you want to get promoted, you have to show that you've been part of it, that you are interested in it. Now, all the interviews, I have people put their hands up because I want to know that they fully understand that I value a lot what's in what they're showing up with, but also that I ask a lot of pertinent questions about LLMs and about AI agents. I want people to be curious and not afraid of that. That's like a big part of it. And then the other part that we do a lot of training, and my co-founder just came back from France on this topic, and he did another training in Canada as well, on the ability to form long-term relationship and trust with our customers, what you were saying earlier, Ross. And that's a lost art because we all want to get quick results. We all have like 1,000 tabs open in our mind. We all have like a gazillion WhatsApp and emails and things to do, and being present and creating trust and being present with the customer, with their problems, but to truly being there and helping, not just closing a quick deal or making a quick buck, but really being there as a partner is like so critical and so rare these days because of AI. And then those are the two things that I focus a lot on.
I love it. And kind of both ends of the spectrum as well, more from the, a technical engineering background, but then also I think it's a great way to stand out now because no one else is really doing it, right? It's almost easy mode. It's like you just have to kind of slow down and be there with people, and no one else really feels like in the market is doing that. And it's a great
it's so few people are fully present. So people.
Totally.
A few other things that we are doing to build and foster those long-term relationships. One is really having alignment around sales, marketing, and CX, sharing a central metric like revenue. So they're not just throwing things over the fence. If everyone's going to that same goal, then having a long-term vision of that revenue goal is critical. And I think that's part of the culture too, of reducing those silos between those departments and having them work together on that common revenue goal. Another thing I think is investing in kind of the data infrastructure so that you're constantly like auto re-enriching, because if it's a long game, people are switching jobs, or maybe there's a new hire coming in at an account that you're playing the long game on, that you need to really remap that org chart and that, who is the above the line buyers. So I think really investing in this like data layer for, call it RevOps or whatever you want to call it. And then the software behind it all. I think knowing that you have to spend some money in different toolings to be better off for long-term success pays dividends, I think.
Totally. And rounding it out, Evan, how are you thinking about this as a team, and what are kind of your competitive advantages to, kind of out execute other folks out there in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about just how do I keep a really good team together and maintain super high quality of that team. So, it starts from a hiring perspective. I've gotten better at this in my career, just having an insanely high bar, because when you bring in good people, it's just such a more fun environment to play. If you ever played on a sports team, like I played volleyball, and like if the other team even was not good, like the game wasn't that fun because the ball drops a lot and it's super slow. But if everyone's good, it's just like it's fast, it's fun. And so I think, for me personally, like that environment I want to hang out in, like that's enjoyable for the 8 or 9 hours I spend at work or whatever it is. I think what else would need to be true for me to hang out a long time at a company? It needs to fit within my lifestyle. I think building a company that's based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you are confronted with this weekend 36 inches of fresh snow, where it's like, well, damn, I want to get out there and rip some pow. And so I think building a company where you can still live your life in a way is important. And then I think the last piece is like development, right? You want to be feeling like, you have some velocity and an upward vector in your career. And that comes from, investing in training and development so that you feel that you're getting better. And yeah, I believe, if you have a solid group of people that sticks around, 3, 4, 5 years together, like that group, even if comparatively small, can accomplish some pretty dang impressive things.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. We were just talking about on the customer side, being in market and kind of all the kind of compounding benefits that you get from that. It's the same thing with a team internally, right? Hey, you can have a killer team if they're together for a year. Well, they're kind of all ramping, right? How do you work together as a team? How do they build out their own organization, all the stuff? Year 3, year 4, that's when you really see the benefits from, how much more executing they can do versus a strategy, because they can all, understand, your sports analogy, like where the pass is going, right? They don't have to look, they know where you're going to be.
Yeah. All the nonverbal communication and trust is to like, that takes so much energy out of a team that's new together, that when they gel and they row together, it's huge.
Totally. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point, right? A players want to be on A teams and they want to be winning. So making sure that you're setting the right goals. I mean, I think one of the best decisions we made actually last year was, I think just picking, and Chris kind of mentioned this, like the right metrics for the teams. It wasn't really about changing any major strategy. I think we just kind of picked the right goals, and people felt like they were winning more, and it wasn't even that different, and kind of had the momentum that created, I think is really important. And well, that's a good way to go out on. But yeah, thanks so much, everyone. I know you have a million things to get to, customers to spend time with, employees to connect with. So appreciate you sharing with the community as you three always do. And yeah, very excited to see the years ahead with User Evidence, Chili Piper, and Sendoso. So appreciate all that you do.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Well, excited to welcome Arnab, the CEO of Exactly, to the stage here. Arnab has an incredible background with over 2 decades leading teams and 7 years driving the AI-powered revenue platform Exactly to incredible success. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Ross, it is great to be here. Thank you for having me. This is a great event that you're putting on, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, as someone who's definitely focused on execution and building Exactly into what it is today, I thought you'd be a great person to come on and talk about, from a CEO's perspective, how do you build and maintain a culture of excellence? So maybe that's a good place to start. How do you think about, building and growing teams and cultures and setting the bar really high?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, I think a lot goes into just generally delivering excellence and performance in a company, from org design to cross-functional collaboration to having clarity around your objectives. I think the piece you hit on is really important, which is building a culture of excellence. And I think it's something that doesn't happen kind of overnight. It's something you have to continuously work at. And you'll feel like there are moments where you've got it, and then there are moments where you feel like you don't. That could all happen sort of in the same day or the same meeting.
Yeah.
But it's really in the organization ingraining a set of habits that allow the team to continuously deliver on expectations, allow them to meet the needs of the marketplace. And so the real question, I think, for a lot of leaders is, how do you ingrain these behaviors? Like, what do you, how do you ensure that your teams are going to live up to those ideas? And so I just delivered a few weeks ago kind of my annual CEO letter. And actually, coincidentally, I tried to articulate what those behaviors are. And so there's sort of three key principles that, I highlighted in this letter. One is, and I think Jeff Bezos has sort of made this term famous, this notion of engaging in truth-seeking behaviors, right? The reality is, like, we can only deliver excellence if we have an objective view of the world, which is based on accurate and unbiased information and understanding. And the important thing is facing those truths, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they might challenge our existing beliefs. And it really is about cultivating intellectual honesty and embracing sort of constructive criticism and staying curious and all of those things. And I think when it comes to salespeople, this is really important, because those principles are the ones that I think are the most helpful in being able to be objective about the status of deals and opportunities, and making sure that you're doing all the right things to get a deal to closure. You're being honest with yourself about, do I have alignment with the power in the deal? Do I have, a buyer's buy-in? Do I understand the timeline? Do I understand the purchasing process? And so constantly engaging in those questions, I think, is super important from a truth-seeking perspective. The second one is this notion of, and this is probably close near and dear to your heart, given what Report does, but it's really embracing, trends quickly with a bias for action, right? I think, the market changes quickly around us, and our ability to react to those changes is, frankly, the difference between success and failure. And that's true, for companies and their strategy, but it's also true for salespeople and deals and transactions that they're working with, right? And so making sure that we are constantly listening, constantly being curious, asking that, fifth level of why kind of question, collecting that information, and then taking action on it, and galvanizing people to take action around us is super critical. And so that's, I think, another, principle that we talk about a lot at Exactly. And then the third one is taking kind of a long-term perspective. I think it's really easy to get very focused on today and the transaction that's in front of us. And obviously, near-term results matter. We don't have business without them. But I think our belief is that a company's true measure of achievement is creating lasting impact, and being thoughtful about the decisions that we make, and really investing in, whether it's our products or enabling our people or the relationships that we have with partners and customers. That, in the end, is what's going to create an ongoing culture of excellence.
Yeah, compounding benefits for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that is something that we talk a lot about from a salesperson perspective. It's, trading off that near-term thing you could potentially get from a customer versus the long-term sort of optimization of that customer relationship. And so really thinking about, in our case, most of our customers are with us for a decade or longer. And so we're really talking about long-term relationships and making sure we're doing right by our customers over the long term.
Totally. And one thing you started with there around building a culture of excellence are the habits and expectations. And that's one thing that I've kind of been obsessed around is, I think most cases where there's been frustration, internally or with customers or partners, has been misaligned expectation setting. I think that's kind of like the key to any great relationship in general, especially the business world. And would love to hear your perspective on, how do you think about setting the right expectations at, the CEO level at your company, right? Like, how do you help, fellow C-suite VPs, directors down to managers and ICs understand what great looks like at your company, And then we can get into the next stage is how do we, what happens when they're doing it or not. But how do you think about that expectation setting at the CEO level?
Yeah, I mean, I would think about it in two ways. In kind of what I call modeling and then measurement, if you will. So I think one, as leaders, you have to model these behaviors that you want, right? And you have to be very intentional about modeling it. And frankly, you need to be really intentional about when you yourself don't live up to expectations, and sort of like being able to sort of say, have the humility to say, yeah, I didn't hit the mark on that one, but I've learned from it. I'm committed to sort of doing better. And I think that frankly is modeling in and of itself as well. So that's sort of like one piece of it. And the second piece of it is having the ability to measure what people are doing, right? I think everyone gets a perspective on how they think they're doing. And sometimes that perspective isn't fully aligned with the reality of the information and the data that of what they're doing. And so having an ability to capture that information and then having processes where you surface that data to allow people to see kind of what they're doing and to allow them to self-modulate what their perceptions are with maybe what the reality is of what's happening.
Yeah. And that's something I think a lot of people have been reflecting on and maybe have gotten wrong, especially in the go-to-market world, around measuring activity versus the quality, right? If we're talking about, hey, we want to deliver excellence, well, it's not a number of calls, it's not a number of emails, it's, how much are we showing our customers or prospects or whoever that we care, that we give a shit. And curious to hear how you think about measurement and the harder to quantify pieces. How do you share what great looks like? How do you share when you're doing that, when you're not doing that, and building a culture again around like the harder to inspect and measure pieces?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is always it's much easier to measure the quantitative than it is the qualitative. Yeah. Right. And I think, and because quantitative is easier to measure, that's what we tend to measure.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. It's like, oh, we can look at all the stuff, but like, I think we could probably all agree that like, that's maybe not the stuff that matters the most.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the way that we think about it exactly is making sure that you're marrying the quantitative with actual qualitative feedback. And so we have a lot of mechanisms in our company across like someone's pre-sales experience, through their product experience, through their post-sale, service and support experience, where we're not only capturing and asking for data around what was your experience, a given a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10, or an NPS score, whatever the case might be, but we're also asking for qualitative feedback, right? And making it as easy as possible, as frictionless as possible for users to provide that. And to be honest, I spend more time reading qualitative feedback than I do looking at numbers.
Right? I think leaders in general, what I found is actually care about the quotes more than the figures, because I think everyone realizes that you can make numbers look a certain way, and you can't change the sentiment of the feeling from a customer and employee with the quote.
And a lot gets lost in averages, right? There's that whole saying, like, my hair could be on fire and I could be sitting on a block of ice. On average, I'm fine, but clearly I'm not fine, right? So I think it's that qualitative feedback that ends up providing you the context that you need to then look at the numbers and say, okay, here's kind of what these numbers are telling us and what it tells us we should be doing next.
Totally. Well, shifting gears a bit, and something, I was excited to get your take on, because we're seeing this trend of markets getting, I feel like it's every 5 years we talk about this, because that's kind of the trend. Markets getting more competitive, right? Great software development and design, a couple of decades ago was rare. And I think it's becoming more common, both as the craft of building great technology and go-to-market teams kind of getting disseminated, but also obviously with technology and AI and SaaS development. I'm curious how you think about staying ahead of the curve and out-competing folks with a company that's been around for a while with great product and customers for 10 plus years. How do you think about winning and staying successful in growing competitive markets?
Yeah, I think it, and it's going to sound cliche, but a lot of it has to do with customer centricity, right? It's like really making sure that you are listening to your customers and really understanding the challenges they face and what they need. And I think kind of like in the old days, when we think about like what defines a market leader, I think people would go to what is the size of the company, what is their market share, right? To look at those objective metrics. And obviously, like, those are important, but I think what really defines market leaders today are companies that can adapt well, right? That are really nimble, that are agile, that are really, understanding how the world is changing and adapting to those. And I think in a lot of cases, you can look at companies that frankly aren't the biggest by market share or revenue, but when you talk about an industry, they're the ones viewed as the market leaders, right? And I mean, in tech, which is the world we live in, like I would say Tesla's a good example of that. I would say Nvidia is a good example of that. Like, I don't think people even know that these aren't the biggest companies in those spaces, but they're definitely viewed sort of as market leaders. And so
staying ahead of the curve, it sounds like, we talk about this in sales, like having a strong, point of view. The folks that have the point of view that are opinionated tend to kind of be recognized, especially in tech, as the market leaders.
Yeah. And to talk my own book for a second, I think it goes back to our principles for a second, right? Which is that, those companies tend to be companies that are following industry trends and have a bias for action. There are also companies that tend to be very engaged in sort of like truth-seeking behaviors and really understanding the world as it is and not how they want it to be. And so I think, this notion of staying ahead of the curve and that prior question about culture of excellence, I think they're all very interrelated.
Totally. And I'm lucky that the next question I had here ties in well with that, and kind of the tension between innovation, right? Staying ahead of the curve, listening to your customers, building in that direction with what's more important than ever in 2025, which is, operational efficiency. And obviously, as a PE-backed company, you have that tension of, how do we think about building for the future with, building a business that we own our own destiny, right? Which I think is a constraint that a lot of companies that were previously VC backed with crazy valuations don't exist anymore because of. So curious to how you think about that tension of mixing innovation with being a long-lasting, sustainable business.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship, frankly, between innovation and operational efficiency. And you kind of almost can't have one without the other, right? You need innovation to fuel kind of your long-term growth, but you need operational efficiency so that in the end you can fund that innovation, if you will, especially in your context of, maybe the money isn't as free-flowing as it used to be. And so I think a lot of the question for us is about how you structure operations so that they're streamlining processes that allow you to accelerate innovation. From an Xactly perspective, over the last few years, we've been innovating at the fastest clip that we've ever innovated in our history. We've launched, half a dozen new products and major enhancements just in the last 12 months. And I think a lot of that is because we have been very focused on making sure we're being operationally efficient, for example, in our R&D organization. And that in turn has allowed us to innovate. And we've really thought about this very holistically. So it's everything from rethinking how we manage our product development activities and how we implement, scaled agile, for example. It's, making sure we're staffing teams globally so that we're working effectively around the clock, we're managing time zones. It's leveraging generative AI to improve our efficiency and our productivity. It's, getting really data-driven in our roadmap planning. Like, we've done all those things, and, one could say, is that operational efficiency? Is that innovation, right? I would argue that because we made a lot of those blocking and tackling investments in operational efficiency, it has allowed us to innovate much faster, which allowed us to develop all of these products and these new features, feature and offerings that we have. And we've kind of done that across the business. Like, when I look at our DevOps, for example, our cloud service delivery, we've reduced our cost of service delivery by over 20% while increasing our uptimes. And I would argue that by being operationally efficient, we've become a lot more innovative in how we've delivered our service, right? So I think they're two sides of the same coin in many ways. And I think as companies think about these things, they should be thinking about, how do I do things effectively and efficiently, and recognize that will help drive, more innovative thinking and will free up capacity to innovate.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I mean, before I was more thinking about it like, oh, how do you spend more money in R&D, and then how do you think about cutting costs? But you're right, the forcing function of maybe having less middle management and more people closer to the customer and the product that are actually building it drives innovation, right? Kind of a forcing function for that. And then going back to the competitive markets, that's also an amazing factor when you think about, who benefits the client, right? You have more competitors, you have to move faster, you have to be more operational efficient, and you're probably, like you said, spitting out more innovative products than ever in the last few years because of that.
Yeah, one topical example of that, and I don't want to get into sort of the politics of it, but like with the DeepSeek AI model, like one could argue that they innovated because they were kind of forced to be operationally efficient. Like I don't know all the details about what hardware and stuff they had access to, but that's an example, I think, of a place where people have been able to invent and do things more effectively in more operationally efficient contexts.
Yeah, and to wrap, my question for you is, obviously a larger, more established business versus, us being a high growth startup. How do you think about this general shift in terms of leadership and management to what we felt is more hands-on approach, right? When I'm talking to peers, folks are looking for, that VP that can also, get their hands dirty and be with a smaller team. It just feels like these strategy folks, that used to be kind of more of that professional management, kind of the founder mode vibe of running businesses. It feels like it's really kind of like made its way across, especially the tech world. So I'm curious, as a more established business, how that's changed your thinking and maybe impacted some of the leadership and management decisions at Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I would say there is no panacea. I don't think founder mode is the answer. I don't think, more traditional management is the answer. I think the thing that's, frankly, the hardest thing about being a leader is adapting your style to the needs of the moment, right? And I think that requires one to be highly cognizant of like what's happening and be very, having insight and intuition around kind of what's needed. And so I would say that it all depends on the situation. I think there are situations where someone, if I can use the term founders mode, needs to be in founders mode. And there are situations where, empowering your teams and delegating and giving them the runway to go make things happen is more appropriate. And frankly, those things could exist at the same time in the same business, but in different functions, right? You may have parts of the business where you need to be, diving deep and getting your, hands dirty and being much more prescriptive. And there might be parts of the business where you're really trying to cultivate a certain culture or a certain sort of way of doing things, and you want people to sort of find their way there. So I don't take any of these as sort of like gospel, to be honest. I think it's really a function of what is it that's needed in a given function, in a given project, in a given moment of time, and sort of bringing those tools to me.
Totally. And before we wrap, the last question that I had top of mind, and something I struggle with daily, and I'm sure leaders out there that are listening do, is how do you balance, yourself getting hands-on and staying close to customers in the field and the reality of the business in the world, and the fact that you have, a large business to manage, and you need to, be directing and setting the pace and the mission and the vision and, all the other pieces that you're doing. How do you think about balancing those two aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like spinning plates. Like you have to be doing kind of all of it, all the time, if you will. So the way I think about, my job generally is there's like three things I have to do. One is run the business. The second is be individually effective. And the third is manage external relationships, right? And the percentage of time I spend on each one of these things will vary, frankly, based on kind of where the business is, right? I think, in my first year as CEO, I spent a lot more time kind of like running the business and putting some, things in place. I suspect moving forward, I'll spend a lot more time, managing sort of external relationships and kind of, being out there, and conversations like these are great in that regard. And then there's always sort of a challenge of like individual effectiveness for leaders, right? Around where do you spend your time and energy? How do you curate a model that's relevant for the organization? How do you continue to build a perspective that you can use to help, guide the team and help them make decisions? Like that's always kind of an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and when you think about annual planning, setting goals for the year at your level, how do you make sure that you're effectively translating that to folks that need to go out and make those decisions on the field? Maybe that's a good way to wrap in talking about strategy to execution. How do you make sure that you have the thing in the back of your mind, what great looks like? Hey, this is what we're going to go out to do. How do you translate that to the hundreds of folks that are going to be making it happen with customers?
Yeah, I mean, I view that as sort of like a meeting of a top-down set of objectives with a bottoms-up set of plans. And actually, from a sales planning perspective, Exactly has great products that help do that. Shameless plug on my part there. But I think from from my perspective, it's being really clear on what are the top-down things that we have to get done. Like, what are the, this notion of keeping like the first thing first, like what is the key objective that we have? How do we make sure, we resource the organization and organize it in a way that it's set up for success? And then really empowering the teams to come up with the very tactical sort of like execution plans that ladder up to allow us to hit those objectives. And then providing guidance and feedback on those plans to make sure that they truly are aligned and there isn't sort of, an air gap between the bottoms up and the tops down way of looking at the world.
Totally. Yeah. I think what I see most common is sometimes, not implying this is you, but sometimes leaders have this, great theory of, hey, this is how we're going to do, open this new channel this year, launch this new product. And it feels very far from, and kind of alienating for the folks that need to go out and do it. It doesn't feel realistic or done in the wrong way. So I think that's something that we constantly hear, again, from kind of the CRO. Hey, you haven't been selling for, X number of years or decades, and you're 4 or 5 levels removed from the field. How do we make sure that we're translating your ideas of what great looks like down to the reality? But, I loved your first point of, hunting for the truth, and keeping those principles, top of mind to drive excellence and, to not be too far from what reality is, right?
Yeah. Great.
Awesome. Any closing thoughts or advice that maybe you'd give yourself starting out on your leadership journey to leave with the community here?
I mean, I think we've covered a bunch of it. I mean, I think at the end of the day, with leaders, there's one thing I'd say is like it's more important to have the questions than it is to have the answers. And so, as people, I think as people come up in organizations, they sort of get graded on having the answers and getting the thing done. And I think when you transition into a leadership role, suddenly like you're not the one who has to always have the answers, nor is it your job to have the answers, but it's your job to know what questions to ask in order to guide the team to the place where they need to be. And so making that transition needs to be a really intentional process. And so that's the one sort of coaching I give a lot of our sort of like first line managers or people who are starting to run larger organizations at exactly as they think about how to be effective in their jobs.
Yeah, you go from, maybe to tie it back to the theme, you go from you executing and being the person to deliver excellence to how do you kind of build a culture around that, right? How do you have people kind of reflect on that themselves and kind of be a force multiplier there? So no, this was awesome. I appreciate you taking some time out of the busy day to share your thoughts here and, talk about ways that you've been able to drive excellence across your organizations.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Ross. I really appreciate it. Congrats on all the success with Accord. We're really excited to be partners with you all and looking forward to doing great things together in the coming years.
What an incredible day. Huge thanks to all the talented CFOs, CEOs, and CROs for taking time to share their perspectives and secrets for building cultures of excellence. Before we wrap, I'm excited to be joined by Lenny, our head of marketing, as we share what Accord has been building to make some of the hardest jobs in the biz a bit easier.
Thanks, Ross. Happy to be here. And for those who are new to Accord, we translate your go-to-market best practices into repeatable playbooks, empowering your team to drive repeatable processes across the entire customer journey. This is done by ensuring your sales methodology isn't just a document, but a living, breathing part of your team's daily workflow. So as we dive in, first things first, Ross, you speak with hundreds of revenue leaders. What are the most common strategic initiatives you're hearing that folks are focused on?
Yeah, definitely, based on the business and, stage and whatnot, but a few themes that keep on coming up, especially the last, 6-12 months has been around value selling, getting back to the basics and a resurgence of the investment in a more value-driven sales motion versus a focus on, PLG and pitching features and functionality. Some of the less sexy stuff like standardizing sales processes and mapping that out. A lot of people focused up market. The volatility of startups and SMBs over the last couple of years, I think, has led a lot of people to focus more up market, more stable companies and businesses. Specific trends like running tighter POCs and decisions being harder to be made. So a lot of people getting dialed in terms of their process there, and just overall aligning the customer journey across the entire go-to-market function. So a bigger focus on alignment across sales, marketing, CS, and kind of everyone rowing in the same direction. I would just say as a common thread across all of that stuff is, kind of the reason for the focus on the XKO today is a focus on execution over strategy. And I think more of a focus from a strategic perspective, focusing on fewer things and doing them very well, and making sure that translates to the team and their customers in the field.
Totally. And how are teams measuring success today? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of probably what you're used to, especially in the go-to-market world. So, manually inspecting fields and stages and separate docs for, medic and deal reviews and decks and slides there. I think a lot of people are looking at probably too many lagging indicators like win rates and ACVs and deal velocity, when I think the best people are looking at the inputs, what leads to success. Do we even understand what those behaviors are, what those assets are, what those deliverables are that we're asking our team to do, and what is the quality of that? And that's kind of going back to, execution excellence. Do we even understand what expectations to set with our team and to measure those inputs instead of, again, going back to win rates, ACV, deal velocity, pipeline? A lot of those have kind of too many facets to really understand what goes into them. So I think the best leaders understand what's working, what leads to success, and they're focused on that. Which was a big reason why, as an ex-seller, ex-leader, I was excited to build a cord and kind of share some of the new functionality today around execution criteria and execution scoring. Instead of asking reps and managers to manually inspect all of their, exit criteria, inputs on deals, just baking that into their workflow, and not having to report at the end of their day all the things they've done, have that inspectable by leadership, and just showing up better in front of our customers and being able to focus on the customer interactions versus that internal inspection and reporting.
Totally. And I know I'm super excited about execution criteria, execution score. You gave a high level of what that means for reps and managers, but maybe some examples for the group of what does that mean for the day-to-day?
Yeah, a good example of this is, for example, what leaders care most about these days, what I'm hearing, especially around going up market and value selling and dialing in this upmarket motion, are things like, do we have executive alignment on every key deal early on? Do we have a quantified business case tied to each opportunity and a specific point of view of why we can help? Do we have a mutual action plan that's truly mutual, mapped out with our champion to go through an evaluation and validation process and end up with, even a yes or no versus a maybe? So a lot of those things, again, live in fields and are manually scored and take a lot of effort to both inspect and create. And the idea is, how can we just align on those as part of the playbook, and reps go about, do their job, build those assets, and don't need to manually report on it. So, the pro for sellers is more time with the customer, focusing on deal strategy instead of the internal inspection. And for leaders, a way to clearly set expectations around what great looks like. And then all this kind of goes out to a score, which measures the adoption of these best practices across all of your sellers and leaders. So instead of just looking at a forecast score and manually inspecting all those inputs, it gives you insight into how well your team is following your clearly defined sales or onboarding or account planning process to make sure you're doing those inputs and leading indicators to closed won deals. So yeah, the idea is, how do we make it easier for the field to follow the best practices that leaders know will lead to closed won revenue, and really clearly setting expectations around what great looks like across the organization.
Totally. That's a good point. And I mean, so essentially with execution criteria and execution score, leaders can be more proactive in their coaching while defining and driving their culture of execution excellence.
Exactly. Yeah. I know, if you're listening thinking, well, we have, a great team in place and we have our strategy and playbook locked from mutual plans, business cases, stakeholder mapping, all of that stuff mandatory on deals, and get where Cord kind of helps operationalize those value selling motions. There's a lot of other tools, right, that people have purchased and ask a lot of reps. So a big focus of ours has been around consolidation. other tools that reps are being asked to use, and how can we consolidate and make it easier both for the reps and admins to manage. A big investment that we've made in kind of co-building with customers the last couple of years has been around sales content management systems. A lot of tools built for marketing, not necessarily designed for sellers, with really low adoption. So that's been a place where we are consolidating even more workflows and tools, and taking our unique approach to building everything into actionable playbooks with all the functionality that teams are used to from existing CMSs, like integrations to Google Drive, SharePoint, content tagging, search from text, all of those things. And really excited to bring more rep workflows into a single place that automatically maps back to Salesforce. So again, they can spend time doing what they love, connecting with customers, bringing value to clients, making it easier for leadership to set their clear expectations and helping reps win, and making it easier for folks to hit their targets, revenue and pipeline goals. So yeah, if you're in the space and want to nerd out on this stuff, want to chat, deal execution and building a culture of excellence, or want to learn more about Accord, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or reach out to me at ross@inaccord.com. But thanks so much for joining, and excited to hear from you.